My fiancé's millionaire father demanded punctuality, but I was late. On the way, I stopped to give my lunch to a weathered homeless man, his grateful smile warming me more than any approval. When I finally stepped into the mansion, my stomach dropped. There, at the head of the table, sat the last person I expected. The delivery man looked nervous when he handed me the heavy black box. "Special delivery for Katie Peters. Sign here, please." His hands shook as he held out the electronic pad. I signed my name, wondering why a simple delivery would make someone so jittery. The box was heavier than it looked, wrapped in expensive black paper with a silver ribbon that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. No return address, just my name written in elegant gold lettering across the top. Inside, nestled in expensive tissue paper that crinkled like whispered secrets, was a navy blue dress with a price tag that made me gasp. $3,000. I'd never even touched something that expensive, let alone owned it. The fabric felt like liquid silk between my fingers, and the cut was so precise it looked like it had been designed by someone who understood exactly how to make a woman look powerful and elegant simultaneously. Underneath lay a handwritten note in precise, old-fashioned script. "Suitable attire for Saturday evening. Do not disappoint. B." My stomach dropped. B.H. Brandon Harrington. Sean's father, the ghost who'd haunted our relationship for 2 years without ever acknowledging my existence. The man Sean talked about in hushed, fearful tones whenever the subject of family came up. Sean walked through the door just as I was holding up the dress, trying to process what was happening. He took one look at it and sank into our kitchen chair like his legs had given out. "Oh no, Katie, this is really happening. My father has never sent clothes to anyone before. This means..." His voice trailed off, but the terror in his expression told me everything I needed to know. "Sean, what does this mean?" I held up the note, my hands trembling slightly. "Why is your father sending me dresses? And why do you look like someone just told you the world was ending?" He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. Because in his world, when Brandon Harrington sends you an outfit, it means you're about to face judgment. Real judgment. The kind that determines whether you're worthy of breathing the same air as his family. I set the dress carefully on our small dining table, treating it like it might explode. Judgment for what? I've never even met the man. That's exactly the point. Sean stood up abruptly, beginning to pace our tiny kitchen. "Katie, my father doesn't do casual meetings. He doesn't invite people over for friendly dinners. When he wants to evaluate someone, he stages an event. Everything is planned, calculated, designed to test you in ways you won't even realize until it's too late." The dress seemed to mock me from across the room, its perfect navy blue fabric catching the afternoon light streaming through our window. It was beautiful, elegant, and completely terrifying. "What kind of tests?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Sean stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, complete, helpless panic mixed with desperate love. "Katie, do you remember when I told you about my college girlfriend, Amanda?" I nodded. He'd mentioned her briefly once, saying things hadn't worked out because of family pressure. She lasted exactly 45 minutes at dinner with my father. He asked her about her family background, her career goals, her thoughts on various social issues. By the time dessert was served, she was excusing herself to go to the bathroom and never came back. I found her crying in the parking lot, saying she couldn't handle the interrogation. My mouth went dry. What did he do to her? He didn't do anything overtly cruel. That's what makes it so terrifying. He just dissected her. Asked questions that seemed innocent but were designed to expose every insecurity, every weakness, every reason why she might not be suitable for his precious family legacy. I thought about Amanda, whoever she was, fleeing into a parking lot rather than face another minute of Brandon Harrington's evaluation. "And you think he's planning to do the same thing to me?" "Kitty, I know he is. This dress," Sean gestured toward it like it was contaminated. "This isn't a gift. It's a uniform. He's telling you exactly how he expects you to look, how he expects you to present yourself. Everything about Saturday night will be on his terms according to his standards." The weight of what was happening started to sink in. How long has he been planning this? Sean's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Probably since the day I told him I was serious about you. My father doesn't make impulsive decisions, Katie. He's been watching, waiting, gathering information. This invitation didn't come out of nowhere. It came when he decided he was ready to determine your fate. My fate. The words came out sharper than I intended. Our fate, he corrected quickly, but the damage was done. I could see it in his eyes. The knowledge that his father held the power to destroy our relationship with a single disapproving look. I walked over to the dress, running my fingers along its perfect seams. Someone had taken careful measurements, chosen the exact right size, the exact right color. Someone had been watching me, studying me, preparing for this moment. Sean, what happens if I fail his test? The silence stretched between us for what felt like hours. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I honestly don't know, Katie. But I know what happened to my brother Michael when Dad decided his wife wasn't suitable for the family. What happened? Dad erased him. Completely. Changed his will, removed him from all family documents, banned him from ever setting foot on family property again. As far as Brandon Harrington is concerned, Michael doesn't exist anymore. The dress suddenly felt less like an elegant gift and more like a costume for my own funeral. I was about to face a man who had the power to erase people from existence, and he'd already chosen my outfit for the execution. Saturday arrived with gray skies that matched my mood perfectly. The navy dress hung in our closet like a silent accusation, waiting for me to transform into whatever version of myself Brandon Harrington expected to see. Sean had barely slept, tossing and turning beside me all night, muttering fragments of worried conversations in his dreams. The train station buzzed with weekend travelers, families heading to visit relatives, couples planning romantic getaways. I envied their carefree expressions as I clutched my ticket to Millbrook Heights, the exclusive enclave where Brandon had built his fortress of solitude. The ticket itself felt expensive, printed on heavy cardstock with gold lettering. Even the transportation to his world cost more than my usual monthly train pass. Finding my seat in the first-class car, another detail Sean had insisted upon, I settled by the window and watched the city slowly fade behind me. The familiar urban landscape of apartment buildings, corner stores, and busy intersections gave way to something entirely different. Suburban sprawl turned into manicured suburbs, which eventually transformed into vast estates separated by miles of pristine countryside. My reflection in the window showed a woman trying desperately to look like she belonged in Brandon's world. The navy dress fit perfectly, uncomfortably so, as if someone had been studying my measurements from afar. My hair was styled in a way that felt foreign, swept back into an elegant chignon that my neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez had helped me achieve after 3 practice attempts. Even my makeup was different, applied according to YouTube tutorials for sophisticated dinner party looks. But beneath all the careful preparation, I was still just Katie Peters from Riverside Avenue, daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse, woman who ran literacy programs for underprivileged kids and shopped at thrift stores more often than department stores. The expensive clothes couldn't change that fundamental truth. The train's announcements grew more refined as we traveled deeper into wealth. Next stop, Millbrook Heights. Please gather all personal belongings. Even the conductor's voice sounded more cultured here, as if proximity to money required better diction. Stepping off at Millbrook Heights station felt like entering a movie set. Everything was too perfect, too clean, too intentionally beautiful. The platform was constructed from what looked like imported marble, with brass fixtures that gleamed despite the overcast sky. Fresh flowers in elaborate arrangements perfumed the air, and not a single piece of litter marred the spotless surfaces. Other passengers dispersed quickly, met by chauffeurs in expensive cars or heading toward the taxi stand where even the vehicles looked more luxurious than anything in my neighborhood. I stood alone on the platform, consulting the handwritten directions Sean had given me, when a well-dressed woman approached. "Excuse me, dear, are you lost?" Her smile was kind but curious, taking in my designer dress with obvious interest. "You don't look familiar, and we know most everyone here in Millbrook Heights." The casual assumption that she would know everyone spoke volumes about how insular this community was. "I'm visiting someone," I replied carefully, not wanting to name Brandon and potentially start gossip. "How lovely. Well, be careful walking. Some of the estate driveways can be quite long." She glanced at my shoes, elegant heels that Sean had purchased to match the dress. "Perhaps you should call for transportation?" I thanked her and started walking, choosing to interpret her concern as genuine rather than condescending. But her words echoed as I made my way through streets that felt more like museum exhibits than places where real people lived. Every house was a mansion, every lawn a perfect green canvas, every driveway populated with cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries. The sidewalks were pristine, lined with trees that had been professionally pruned into perfect symmetry. Street signs were crafted from elegant bronze rather than standard metal, and even the fire hydrants looked like decorative art pieces. This wasn't just wealth. It was wealth that had been carefully curated and maintained to create an artificial paradise. My phone buzzed with a text from Sean. Remember, arrive exactly at 7. Not a minute early, not a minute late. Dad respects punctuality above everything else. The pressure of perfect timing added urgency to every step. I found myself checking my watch obsessively, calculating and recalculating the distance remaining versus the time available. The stress was making my palms sweat despite the cool evening air, and I worried about arriving with visible signs of nervousness. As I walked deeper into the heart of Millbrook Heights, the houses grew larger and more imposing. Some were hidden entirely behind tall hedges or stone walls, revealing only glimpses of towers or chimneys that hinted at the grandeur within. Others stood proudly visible, displaying their architectural magnificence like peacocks showing their plumage. My grandmother's voice started whispering in my memory, stories she told me about dignity, about treating every person with respect regardless of their circumstances. Katie Mija, she used to say, the measure of your character isn't how you treat people who can help you, but how you treat those who can't. The memory brought unexpected comfort, reminding me that beneath this expensive costume, I was still the granddaughter of a woman who had cleaned houses to put food on the table but never lost her pride or compassion. Maria Santos had taught me that true worth came from within, not from the size of your house or the price of your clothes. But would those values help me survive whatever test Brandon Harrington had planned? Sean's instructions played on repeat in my mind. Don't mention my nonprofit work, don't talk about my family's modest background, don't be late, don't say anything controversial. Essentially, don't be myself. The conflict between staying true to my grandmother's teachings and following Sean's desperate guidelines created a knot of tension in my chest. Was I willing to pretend to be someone else just to gain approval from a man who judged people based on their social status rather than their character? A movement ahead caught my attention. An elderly homeless man sitting on a park bench in this pristine neighborhood, looking completely out of place among the manicured perfection. His presence seemed impossible here, where poverty would surely be swiftly removed by private security or local authorities. I checked my watch, 20 minutes until 7 o'clock. Plenty of time to reach the Harrington estate. But something about the man's solitary figure tugged at my conscience, reminding me of my grandmother's lessons about compassion. This was it, the moment that would reveal who I truly was beneath Brandon's expensive dress. The elderly man sat hunched against the evening chill, his thin frame seeming to disappear into the weathered wood of the park bench. Everything about him contrasted sharply with the polished perfection surrounding him. His clothes were patched and faded, his shoes worn through at the soles, his gray hair unkempt and wild. Yet there was something in his posture, a quiet dignity that refused to be diminished by his circumstances. I found myself slowing my pace, then stopping entirely. Sean's voice echoed urgently in my memory. 17 minutes, Katie. You have exactly 17 minutes to get there and not a second longer. But looking at this forgotten soul in the heart of Millbrook Heights' pristine paradise, time seemed to suspend itself. The man noticed my hesitation and looked up. His eyes were startlingly blue, clear and intelligent despite the weariness etched into every line of his face. There was no pleading in his gaze, no expectation of charity. Just the weary acceptance of someone who had learned not to hope for kindness from strangers. Good evening, he said softly, his voice carrying the refined accent of someone who had once moved in educated circles. The contradiction struck me. Here was a man who spoke like a professor but sat like society's forgotten. Good evening, I replied, my feet apparently deciding to disobey my brain's commands to keep walking. Are you all right? A smile ghosted across his weathered features. Define all right, young lady. I'm breathing, which is more than some can say. Though I must admit, this October air has more bite than my jacket can handle. The admission was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. It made the contrast between his situation and my expensive outfit even more jarring. Here I was, wearing a $3,000 dress to impress a man I'd never met, while this gentleman shivered in clothes that wouldn't have cost $30 when they were new. My phone buzzed with another message from Sean. Please tell me you're almost there. Dad's assistant called to confirm timing again. The practical part of my mind calculated distances and walking speeds. I had maybe 15 minutes left and the Harrington estate was still several blocks away. Being late could destroy everything Sean and I had built together. Brandon Harrington had made his expectations crystal clear, punctuality above all else. But my grandmother's voice cut through the panic as clear as if she were standing beside me. Mija, when you see someone who needs help, you help. The rest is just noise. I'm sorry, the man said, noticing my distraction. I don't mean to keep you. You look like you have somewhere important to be. His eyes took in my elegant dress, the careful styling, the expensive shoes. Special occasion? Dinner, I managed, the word feeling inadequate to describe the trial awaiting me. With my fiancé's father. Ah. Something flickered in those intelligent eyes. The meeting that changes everything then. I remember those. There was a story behind that comment, layers of experience that spoke of a life once lived in different circumstances. But before I could ask what he meant, his stomach growled audibly in the silence. When did you last eat? I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Yesterday, I believe. The shelter serves lunch at noon, but He trailed off, looking embarrassed. I seem to have lost track of time today. These streets all look the same after a while. The turkey sandwich in my purse had been my insurance policy. Something light to eat beforehand so I wouldn't be hungry during dinner with Brandon. Now looking at this man's hollow cheeks and the way his clothes hung loose on his frame, keeping it seemed impossibly selfish. Here, I said, pulling out the sandwich before I could second-guess myself. It's not much, but... He stared at the offered food as if I'd produced a miracle. Oh, my dear, I couldn't possibly. Please, I interrupted gently. My grandmother always said food tastes better when it's shared. His hands trembled slightly as he accepted the sandwich, and when he took that first bite, his eyes actually closed with what looked like relief. The gratitude in his expression was so pure, so genuinely appreciative, that it made my chest tight with emotion. Thank you, he said after swallowing. You have no idea what this means. But I was beginning to think I did. This simple act of sharing felt more meaningful than all of Sean's careful preparations for tonight. More real than the expensive dress I wore or the performance I was about to give. The man shivered again despite the sandwich, and I noticed how the evening breeze cut right through his thin jacket. Without thinking, I reached up and unwound the cashmere scarf from around my neck. The scarf Sean had specifically chosen to complement my outfit, the one that cost more than this man probably saw in months. You need this more than I do, I said, draping it around his shoulders. The soft gray fabric looked almost absurd against his worn clothing, like putting a silk bow on a package wrapped in newspaper. But the way his eyes widened, the careful way he touched the expensive material, made it the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. This is far too generous, he protested, but his hands clutched the scarf as if it were a lifeline. It's just a scarf, I lied, thinking of Sean's reaction when he noticed it was missing. No, the man said quietly, those penetrating blue eyes meeting mine directly. It's not just a scarf. It's proof that kindness still exists in a world that seems to have forgotten it. My phone buzzed insistently. Another message, probably from Sean, probably about timing. But for the first time all day I felt genuinely calm. Whatever happened at dinner tonight, whatever test Brandon Harrington had planned, I had already passed the only examination that mattered to me. I have to go, I said reluctantly. Of course you do. And thank you truly. You've reminded an old man that there are still good people in this world. As I walked away, his words followed me. I was now officially, irrevocably late for the most important meeting of my life. Sean would be devastated. Brandon would be disapproving. Our entire future hung in the balance. But somehow, carrying the memory of that grateful smile and those wise blue eyes, I felt more prepared for whatever awaited me than all of Sean's coaching could have achieved. The Harrington estate loomed before me like a fortress designed to intimidate. Massive stone columns supported a portico that could have housed my entire apartment, while towering windows stared down like unblinking eyes. But it was the figure pacing frantically at the top of the steps that made my heart sink. Sean, checking his watch obsessively, his face already twisted with anxiety. The moment he spotted me hurrying up the manicured walkway, his expression transformed. The concerned fiancé disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. His eyes were wild, his jaw clenched, and when he spoke, his voice carried a venom I'd never heard before. 17 minutes, Katie. 17. He grabbed my arm as I reached the top step, his grip tight enough to leave marks. Do you have any idea what you've just done? What this means? His fury should have terrified me, should have sent me into apologetic spirals of explanation. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm settling over me. The warmth from the homeless man's grateful smile still lingered in my chest, creating a buffer against Sean's rage. I'm sorry I'm late, I said quietly, not because I truly felt sorry, but because some part of me still hoped to salvage this situation. There was someone who needed help. Someone who needed help? Sean's voice climbed to a dangerous pitch. You were late to the most important meeting of our lives because you stopped to chat with some vagrant? The word vagrant hit me wrong, carrying a dismissiveness that made me want to defend the dignified man I just met. He wasn't a vagrant, Sean. He was a human being who was cold and hungry. A bum, Katie. You stopped to help a bum when you should have been here on time looking perfect. Sean's hands were shaking now, whether from rage or panic I couldn't tell. This isn't one of your non-profit charity cases. This is my father. The contempt in his voice when he said, charity cases revealed something ugly that I'd never noticed before. How long had he felt this way about my work? How many times had he bitten back similar comments about the people I served? His eyes suddenly focused on my neck and his face went completely white. Where is it? Where is what? The scarf, Katie. The $700 cashmere scarf that was specifically chosen to match your dress. The one that was supposed to show my father that you understand quality, that you belong in our world. My throat felt dry. I gave it away. The words hung between us like a confession of murder. Sean stared at me as if I'd just admitted to burning down an orphanage. You gave it away, he repeated slowly, each word dripping with disbelief. To who? To the man on the bench. He was shivering and You gave a $700 scarf to a homeless bum? His voice cracked on the last word. Katie, what is wrong with you? That scarf was chosen specifically for tonight. It was part of the plan. It was supposed to show my father that you can fit into his world, that you understand value and worth and... I do understand worth, I interrupted, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Just not the same way you do, apparently. Before Sean could respond, the massive front doors opened with silent precision. A butler emerged, tall, thin, and so formally dressed he looked like he'd stepped out of a Victorian novel. His face was a mask of professional neutrality, but I caught something in his eyes as they took in our obvious tension. Judgment, perhaps. Or maybe just weary familiarity with family drama. Mr. Harrington is expecting you, the butler said, his voice carrying the kind of crisp British accent that spoke of expensive education and careful breeding. Please follow me. Sean immediately straightened, his rage transforming into barely controlled panic. He grabbed my hand, his palms sweaty despite the cool evening air. Remember what I told you, he whispered urgently as we crossed the threshold into the mansion's foyer. Let me do the talking. Don't mention your job. Don't talk about your family. And for God's sake, don't mention the homeless man or the scarf. The interior of the mansion was even more intimidating than its exterior. We walked through halls that felt more like museum galleries, lined with paintings that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. Classical sculptures occupied alcoves between doorways, and Persian rugs so beautiful I was afraid to step on them stretched across marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. Our footsteps echoed in the vastness, creating a rhythm that felt like a funeral march. Sean's grip on my hand tightened with each step, his whispered instructions becoming more frantic. Don't stare at the artwork. Don't ask questions. Keep your answers brief and respectful. Remember, this man has destroyed businesses with a single phone call. He's ruined lives because someone served him the wrong wine. Katie, please be perfect. The desperation in his voice should have made me feel sorry for him. Instead, it made me realize how much our entire relationship had been built on his need for me to be something other than myself. How many times had he coached me on what to say, how to act, who to be? And I'd gone along with it, thinking it was love, thinking it was protection. But after giving my sandwich to a grateful stranger, after seeing the genuine appreciation in those intelligent blue eyes, I understood the difference between someone who valued my kindness and someone who wanted to hide it. We stopped before a set of carved wooden doors that looked heavy enough to stop an army. The butler's hand moved to the ornate brass handles, and Sean's grip on my fingers became almost painful. "This is it," he breathed, his face pale with terror. "Katie, everything we've worked for, everything we've planned, it all depends on the next hour. Please don't let me down." The doors opened with theatrical silence, revealing a dining room that belonged in a palace. A table stretched the length of the room, its polished surface reflecting the light from a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than my childhood home. And there at the far end sat a solitary figure. My knees nearly buckled with shock. It was him, the homeless man from the park bench. The weathered face, the intelligent blue eyes, the quiet dignity that had drawn me to help him despite Sean's warnings about punctuality. But he wasn't homeless. He was Brandon Harrington. And around his shoulders, like a badge of honor against his now revealed expensive clothing, was my gray cashmere scarf. Behind me, Sean made a sound that was part gasp, part whimper. I felt him go rigid with horror as the truth crashed over him. His fiancée hadn't just helped some random vagrant. She'd helped his father. The father he'd spent weeks teaching her to impress. The father he'd called a bum not 5 minutes ago. The silence in that vast room was deafening as 3 people processed the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Brandon Harrington rose from his chair with fluid grace, and I realized that even his posture had been part of the performance on the park bench. Gone was the hunched, defeated figure I'd encountered earlier. This man stood tall, commanding, with the bearing of someone accustomed to controlling rooms full of powerful people. "Katie," he said, his voice carrying the same gentle warmth I remembered, but now with an underlying authority that filled the vast dining room. "Please come in. Don't mind the theatrical entrance. I do apologize for the deception earlier this evening." The kindness in his tone was such a stark contrast to Sean's harsh words that I felt tears prick at my eyes. After an hour of being berated for my choices, having someone speak to me with genuine respect felt like a gift. "I don't understand," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Brandon's smile was patient, understanding. "Of course you don't. Please take a seat." He gestured to the chair directly to his right, the position of honor at the long table. "I have quite a story to tell you both." Sean hadn't moved from the doorway. He stood frozen, his face cycling through expressions of horror, confusion, and dawning comprehension. When Brandon's eyes finally shifted to acknowledge his son's presence, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Sean," Brandon said, his voice now devoid of warmth. "You may join us or you may leave. The choice, as always, is yours." The dismissive tone made Sean flinch visibly. He stumbled forward like a man in a trance, taking a seat far down the table, as far from both of us as possible. The distance felt symbolic. He was no longer part of the inner circle, no longer the favored son whose approval mattered. I moved to the chair Brandon had indicated, my legs unsteady. The cashmere scarf still draped around his shoulders looked almost regal now, transformed from a homeless man's borrowed warmth into what it truly was, a token of character proven under pressure. "You're wondering how long I've been doing this," Brandon said, settling back into his chair with the ease of someone completely comfortable with his own power. "The answer is 37 years. Ever since my late wife pointed out that everyone who came into our lives seemed to want something from us rather than simply wanting to know us." He paused, his fingers absently stroking the soft fabric of my scarf. "She suggested I find a way to see people's true nature when they believed their actions had no consequences. When they thought no one important was watching." The butler appeared silently, pouring wine from a bottle that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Brandon waited until we were alone again before continuing. "I've sat on park benches in disguise outside the homes of potential business partners, watching how they treated their gardeners or delivery staff. I've posed as a janitor in office buildings to observe how executives behaved when they thought no one of importance could see them. I've been a homeless man on street corners, an elderly customer struggling with heavy groceries, a confused tourist asking for directions." My mind reeled at the implications. How many people had unknowingly been tested by one of the most powerful men in the country? "What I've learned," Brandon continued, "is that kindness is the rarest commodity in the world. Rarer than gold, more valuable than diamonds. Most people, when faced with someone who can offer them nothing in return, simply look away. They're too busy, too important, too focused on their own agendas to spare even basic human decency. Sean's face was pale as death. I could practically see him replaying every word he'd said about the bum who had made me late, every dismissive comment about my charitable work, every instruction to hide my true nature. You, Katie, Brandon said, turning to face me directly, stopped when you had every reason to keep walking. You were late for what you believed was the most important meeting of your life. You were wearing expensive clothes and carrying yourself like someone with somewhere important to be. And yet, when you saw someone in need, you didn't hesitate. He lifted the sandwich wrapper that still sat on the elegant china plate beside him. You gave away your only food. Not your spare change, not your leftover lunch, but your only sustenance for the day. And when you saw I was still cold. He touched the scarf again, his eyes growing distant. This scarf costs more than some people make in months. It was specifically chosen to impress me, wasn't it? I nodded, not trusting my voice. And you gave it away without a second thought to keep a stranger warm. Not because you expected recognition or reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Across the table, Sean made a sound that might have been a sob. I've tested hundreds of people over the years, Brandon continued, his voice gaining strength and conviction. Heirs to fortunes who stepped over me like I was garbage. CEOs who lectured me about the importance of hard work while refusing to spare a dollar for someone they assumed was lazy. Politicians who gave speeches about compassion but couldn't be bothered to acknowledge my existence. He stood up, moving to the windows that overlooked his pristine estate. They all passed their professional interviews. They all had perfect resumes, impeccable references, flawless presentations. But when it mattered, when character was the only currency that counted, they revealed themselves to be bankrupt. The silence stretched between us until Sean finally found his voice. Dad, You what? Brandon turned, and for the first time, I saw the full force of his disappointment focused on his son. You coached her to hide her charitable work because you thought I'd see it as weakness? You taught her to conceal her humble background because you were ashamed of her parents' honest work? You spent weeks training her to be someone else entirely because you assumed I valued appearance over substance. Each question landed like a physical blow. Sean's shoulders hunched forward as if he were trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Worse than that, Brandon continued, his voice deadly quiet. Tonight, when she showed you exactly the kind of character that makes someone truly valuable, you called her actions foolish. You dismissed a man you thought was homeless as a bum. You treated her act of kindness like a betrayal. Brandon moved back to his chair, his movements deliberate and controlled. Sean, you've failed every test that matters. Not just tonight but for years. You've shown me that you value the wrong things, judge people by the wrong standards, and would rather have a beautiful puppet than a partner with genuine character. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Sean's face crumpled and I realized he was crying, not the angry tears of earlier, but the broken sobs of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. However, Brandon said, and something in his tone made both Sean and me look up sharply. Character can be learned. Values can be corrected. And thankfully for you, son, Katie has enough integrity for both of you. He smiled at me, the same grateful expression I'd seen on the park bench. Shall we discuss wedding plans? The dinner that followed Brandon's revelation was unlike anything I could have imagined. What I had expected to be an interrogation became the most genuine conversation I'd had in months. Brandon leaned forward in his chair, his eyes bright with curiosity as he asked about my literacy program. Tell me about the children you work with, he said, cutting into what looked like the most expensive piece of beef I'd ever seen. What drew you to education? For the first time in weeks, I didn't have to filter my words or worry about sounding too passionate. There's this 8-year-old girl named Maria. She came to us barely able to write her own name, convinced she was stupid because she'd been struggling in school. Last month, she read her first full chapter book and cried because she was so proud of herself. Brandon's smile was genuine, transforming his entire face. That must have been incredibly rewarding. What's your philosophy about reaching struggling readers? As I explained my methods, my theories about learning differences, my dreams of expanding the program, I noticed Sean sitting silently at the far end of the table. His untouched food grew cold as he watched his father engage with the very topics he had forbidden me from discussing. Every enthusiastic response from Brandon seemed to wound him deeper. Your parents must be very proud, Brandon continued. What do they think of your work? I found myself talking about my father's influence, how his classroom stories had inspired my love of teaching. I described my mother's work at the community clinic, her dedication to helping families who couldn't afford private health care. With each word, I watched Brandon's respect for me grow, and I saw Sean's face pale as he realized his father was praising everything he had told me to hide. Remarkable, Brandon said, raising his wine glass. To parents who instill values that money can't buy. The toast felt directed at Sean as much as at me. When Brandon asked about my future plans, I found myself sharing dreams I hadn't even told Sean. Ideas about opening learning centers in underserved communities, training teachers in new methodologies, maybe even writing a book about literacy education. I'd like to fund that, Brandon said simply. I nearly choked on my wine. I'm sorry. Your learning centers. Consider it my first official investment in your future. Our future, he corrected, gesturing between himself and me. Family invests in family. Sean made a strangled sound from his end of the table, and for the first time since we'd arrived, Brandon addressed him directly. Something to add, son? I never knew Katie had such detailed plans, Sean whispered, his voice thick with shame. She never told me about the book idea or the expansion dreams. Did you ever ask? Brandon's question was quiet but cutting. The silence that followed answered everything. The remainder of dinner passed with Brandon treating me like the daughter he'd never had while Sean sat in exile at the other end of the table. When the butler finally cleared the last plates, Brandon walked us to the front door personally, an honor I suspected few guests received. Sean, he said as we reached the entrance, his hand resting on the door handle. You have a choice to make. You can continue being the man who sees Katie's kindness as weakness, or you can become someone worthy of her character. But understand this. Her place in this family is secure regardless of your decision. The car ride home was a tomb of silence. Sean gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white, and I watched the familiar streets blur past through my own reflection in the passenger window. By the time we reached our apartment, I could hear his breathing becoming labored, irregular. The moment our front door closed behind us, Sean collapsed. He didn't just cry, he shattered. His whole body shook as sobs tore through him, and he slumped against our kitchen counter like his strings had been cut. I had never seen a grown man break down so completely, and despite everything he had put me through, my heart ached for him. Katie, I'm so sorry, he gasped between sobs. I'm so incredibly sorry. Not just for tonight but for everything. For 2 years of trying to make you into someone else. For being ashamed of the things that make you beautiful. For caring more about impressing my father than protecting the woman I love. He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. I spent so much time being terrified of his judgment that I became exactly the kind of person he despises. And I tried to turn you into that too. The raw honesty in his voice made something shift inside me. This wasn't the polished, controlling Sean I'd been living with. This was someone stripped bare, finally seeing himself clearly. I watched him tonight, Sean continued, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Watched him light up when you talked about your work, your parents, your dreams. Things I told you to hide because I thought they weren't good enough. Katie, you've been good enough this whole time. You've been better than good enough. I'm the one who wasn't worthy. Over the following weeks, I witnessed a transformation that seemed impossible. Sean began volunteering at my literacy program, initially awkward and uncertain but gradually finding his own way to connect with the children. He started asking me about my work not to critique it but because he genuinely wanted to understand what mattered to me. He called his brother Michael for the first time in 5 years, apologizing for not standing up to their father's judgment of Sarah. He researched my field, reading articles about educational equity and learning differences, not to control my conversations but to be a better partner in them. Most surprisingly, he began developing his own relationship with Brandon based on respect rather than fear. They started having regular dinners where Sean listened more than he spoke, learning about the values that truly mattered to his father. 3 months later, I stood in my parents' backyard surrounded by white folding chairs and simple flower arrangements that my mother and I had made ourselves. The ceremony was everything I had always wanted. Intimate, authentic, focused on love rather than spectacle. Brandon sat in the front row wearing a perfectly tailored suit and my gray cashmere scarf, which he had insisted on keeping as a reminder of the day his real daughter joined the family. He walked me down the aisle when my father's emotional state made it clear he wouldn't make it through without sobbing. "Thank you," Brandon whispered as he placed my hand in Sean's, "for showing an old man that there are still people in this world who choose kindness over convenience." Sean's vows were simple but profound. "Katie, I promise to never again ask you to be anyone other than exactly who you are. Your compassion saved not just my relationship with my father, but my relationship with myself. I promise to spend the rest of my life becoming the man worthy of your heart." As I looked out at our small gathering, my parents crying happy tears, Brandon beaming with genuine pride, Sean's eyes reflecting a love based on who I truly was rather than who he wanted me to become, I thought about that moment on the park bench when I'd chosen kindness over punctuality. That single decision had changed 3 lives completely. Brandon had found the authentic relationships he'd been searching for through decades of testing. Sean had discovered that love meant celebrating someone's character rather than trying to change it. And I had learned that the right choice might not always be the easy choice, but it will always lead you to where you're meant to be. The homeless man's grateful smile had been worth more than a millionaire's approval. It had earned me a family that loved me exactly as I was. If this story of unexpected redemption touched your heart, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Katie chose compassion over punctuality, not knowing she was being tested by the very man she was trying to impress. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Haley Thompson, and I'm 34 years old. 15 years after my father called me a burden and kicked me out, I discovered that the house he sold and $2 million my mother secretly left behind were legally mine. The day I found out, I collapsed into tears, remembering Mom's last whispered words, "Everything will make sense someday." For 15 years, I believed my father's lies while he tried to steal my inheritance. The truth would have remained buried if not for one persistent lawyer and my mother's extraordinary foresight. Before I dive into how I discovered my mother's secret fortune, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment, subscribe if you're new here, and get ready for a story about family secrets that will change how you think about trust. Growing up in Seattle, my early childhood memories are washed in the warm glow of safety and love, mostly thanks to my mother, Jessica. She was a dedicated nurse at Northwest Hospital, working long shifts, but somehow always finding time to be present for me. I remember her gentle hands braiding my hair before school, the smell of her vanilla perfume lingering in the hallway long after she'd left for her night shifts. She'd leave little notes in my lunchbox with silly jokes or words of encouragement. When I'd have nightmares, she'd sit at the edge of my bed, stroking my hair until I fell back asleep, no matter how early her shift started the next morning. My father, Curtis Thompson, was a different story. In my earliest memories, he was attentive and even playful. I have faded mental snapshots of him tossing me into the air at the neighborhood park, both of us laughing as my mother watched nervously from a nearby bench. He worked as an investment advisor at a local firm, wearing crisp suits and carrying a leather briefcase that I wasn't allowed to touch. He'd come home and scoop me up, calling me his little princess and bringing me small trinkets from his business trips. Our home was modest by Seattle standards, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a small backyard where Mom grew tomatoes and strawberries. It wasn't fancy, but it was immaculately kept, with bookshelves lining the living room walls and family photos clustered on every available surface. That house represented security to me, the solid foundation of our family. The contrast between my parents became more apparent as I grew older. Mom was naturally nurturing, finding joy in the simplest things. She'd make ordinary Saturdays special with pancakes shaped like animals or impromptu picnics in the living room when it rained. Dad, meanwhile, became increasingly focused on appearances and status. He'd comment on neighbors' new cars or vacations, speaking with barely disguised envy about clients who had made it big. By the time I was 10, the first clear signs of my father's dismissive attitude toward me emerged. I brought home an art project that had won recognition at school, a watercolor painting my art teacher had specifically praised. While my mother immediately wanted to frame it, my father glanced at it and said, "That's nice, but maybe focus more on math. Artists don't exactly drive BMWs." Mom stepped in immediately. "Curtis, Haley is talented. We should encourage that." Their eyes locked in a silent battle I didn't fully understand then, but my mother won that round. The painting was framed and hung in our hallway by the next day. As I entered my teen years, my passion for photography developed. I'd save my allowance to buy film for an old camera my mother found at a garage sale. My father saw this as another impractical hobby. "You're wasting money on that?" "Film costs add up, Haley," he'd say, despite the fact that I was using my own savings. My mother would quietly slip me extra film when he wasn't looking. The tension between my parents grew, though they tried to shield me from it. Sometimes I'd hear them arguing behind their bedroom door late at night, their voices hushed but intense. Often, these arguments seemed to be about money, which confused me. We lived comfortably, not luxuriously, but we never seemed to struggle. My father drove a nice car, and we took modest vacations most years. Yet the word money was often hissed through those closed doors. "You're being ridiculous about this, Jessica," I once heard my father say. "What's the point of having it if we don't use it?" "It's not about that, Curtis," my mother replied, her voice tight with restraint. "It's about security for Haley's future." I didn't understand then what they were talking about. Money was a strange, abstract concept in our house. We never seemed to lack it, yet my father constantly acted as though we needed to be careful with spending, particularly when it came to anything for me beyond necessities. On my 16th birthday, my mother gave me my first real camera, a used but high-quality Nikon that I had been eyeing for months at the local camera shop. The moment I unwrapped it, I could feel my father's disapproval radiating across the kitchen table. "That's an expensive gift for a hobby, Jessica," he said, not even addressing me directly. My mother put her hand on my shoulder. "It's not just a hobby if it's her passion, Curtis. Besides, I saved up for it specially." That camera became my most prized possession. I took it everywhere, documenting life through my viewfinder, developing my eye and my technique. Photography gave me an identity separate from the increasingly tense atmosphere at home. Through the lens, I controlled what was in frame and what wasn't, something I couldn't do in the rest of my life. By the time I was accepted to the University of Washington at 19, the distance between my father and me had grown into a chasm. He attended my high school graduation with a perfunctory smile, and his congratulations felt hollow when I received my acceptance letter. My mother, meanwhile, cried happy tears and took me shopping for dorm supplies, helping me pack with meticulous care. "I'm so proud of you, Haley," she told me as we folded clothes into suitcases. "You're going to do amazing things." I left for my freshman year feeling like I was leaving my mother alone on an island with my father, but also excited for my first taste of independence. Little did I know that my sophomore year would never be completed, and that life as I understood it was about to change forever. The call came on an ordinary Tuesday during my sophomore year. I was walking across campus, planning my photography project for midterms when my phone rang. My father's name on the screen was unusual enough to make me stop walking immediately. "Your mother collapsed at work," he said without preamble. "They've taken her to Northwest. You should come." The 3-hour gap between that call and arriving at the hospital remains a blur in my memory. I remember throwing clothes into a bag, the bus ride that felt eternal, and the antiseptic smell that hit me when I finally pushed through the hospital doors. My mother, who had spent decades caring for patients in these very halls, now lay pale against white sheets. The diagnosis came like a physical blow: advanced pancreatic cancer. Terminal. The doctor spoke gently about months, not years, while my father stood silently by the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline rather than at my crumbling mother. "This is impossible," I said, my voice barely audible. She wasn't even sick. But she had been, I learned. She'd been ignoring symptoms, attributing fatigue to long shifts, dismissing pain as normal aging. By the time she couldn't ignore it anymore, the cancer had already spread. What struck me immediately was my father's strange detachment. While I collapsed into tears by my mother's bedside, he maintained a composed, almost businesslike demeanor, discussing treatment options with doctors as if they were talking about investment strategies. There was concern there, yes, but something was missing. The devastation that should accompany the news that your partner of 25 years was dying. I made the decision that night to take a leave of absence from school. My mother protested weakly from her hospital bed. "Your education comes first, Haley. I won't let this derail your future." "Mom, there will be time for school later," I insisted, holding her increasingly frail hand. "Right now, I need to be here." The next few months became a new routine of hospital visits, home care, and hushed conversations about comfort rather than cure. My father maintained his work schedule, citing the need for health insurance and income, leaving the bulk of my mother's care to me. In truth, I was grateful for the time alone with her, even under these circumstances. During those months, we had conversations we'd never had before. She told me stories of her own youth, her dreams of becoming a photographer that she'd set aside for nursing, which felt more practical. She shared wisdom about love, friendship, and finding purpose. But there were also moments when she seemed on the verge of telling me something important, only to retreat into vague reassurances. "There are things I've arranged, Haley," she said one afternoon as we sat in the garden during a rare good day. "Things that will make sense when the time is right." When I pressed her, she smiled tiredly. "Just know that I've always tried to protect you, even from things you didn't know needed protecting from." During this period, a lawyer named Amelia Garrison visited our home 3 times. Each time, my father was at work, and I was asked to give them privacy. I thought little of it then, assuming it was standard end-of-life legal matters. Only years later would I understand the significance of those meetings. As spring turned to summer, my mother's condition deteriorated rapidly. One evening, as I adjusted her pillows, she gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll go back to school after everything," she insisted. "Your photography, your education, don't give those up. Promise me." "I promise, Mom," I said, fighting back tears. "Everything will make sense someday," she whispered, a phrase she'd repeat several more times in her final days. The end came on a quiet Sunday morning in July. I was holding her hand, my father dozing in the chair by the window. She simply stopped breathing, slipping away so peacefully that for a moment, I didn't realize what had happened. The silence in the room became absolute as the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor flattened into a single tone. My father handled the funeral arrangements with the same detached efficiency he'd shown throughout her illness. When I suggested a celebration of life with her many friends and colleagues from the hospital, he insisted on keeping it simple and private. "Your mother wouldn't want a fuss," he said firmly. The funeral was indeed sparse, with just a handful of attendees. I felt hollow inside as I watched my mother's casket lowered into the ground, wondering why my father seemed more inconvenienced than bereaved. 2 weeks after the funeral, true to my promise, I returned to college. I moved through my days in a fog of grief, going through the motions of classes and assignments without really engaging. Photography, once my passion, became mechanical. I took pictures because I had promised my mother I would continue, not because I felt the joy in it anymore. I didn't know then that my mother had set wheels in motion that wouldn't complete their turn for 15 years. I didn't know that her cryptic words about things making sense someday weren't just the comfort of a dying woman, but a promise that would eventually be fulfilled. 3 years later, I graduated with my degree in visual arts, specializing in photography. The day was bittersweet, pride in my accomplishment mixed with the aching absence of my mother. My father attended the ceremony, but left immediately after, citing a work commitment. I celebrated with friends that evening, then took the bus home the next day, looking forward to a brief stay before moving to Portland where I'd lined up an interview at a photography studio. When I arrived at our family home, I was met with a scene that stopped me in my tracks. The living room was filled with cardboard boxes, some sealed with packing tape, others still open. I recognized my mother's handwriting on some of the labels: kitchen, books, Jessica's clothes. "Dad," I called out, setting down my bags. "What's going on?" My father emerged from the hallway, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Oh, you're back. I'm clearing things out." "Clearing things out?" I repeated, moving toward a box containing photo albums. These are Mom's things. And she's been gone for 3 years, he said matter-of-factly. It's time to move on. I'm thinking of downsizing. The casual dismissal of my mother's memory hit me like a physical blow. You could have waited until I was here. Some of these things might be important to me. His expression hardened. Look, Haley, I've supported you through college, which wasn't cheap. Your mother always insisted on sending you to that expensive program rather than something practical. Do you have any idea what a financial burden you've been? The word burden echoed in the room. Financial burden. As if my education, my existence, had been nothing but a drain on him. What are you talking about? I asked, genuinely confused. Mom wanted me to go to college. She made me promise. Your mother had impractical ideas about a lot of things, he cut in. The reality is, we stretched ourselves thin for years because of her insistence on your art school. This revelation didn't align with anything I understood about our family finances. We'd never lived extravagantly, but I'd never been aware of financial struggles either. I need you to clear out your things by the end of the week, he continued. I'm putting the house on the market. You're selling our home? I couldn't process what I was hearing. Where am I supposed to go? You're 22, Haley. Most adults your age are living independently. You have a degree now, supposedly. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. The conversation devolved further, with my father revealing layers of resentment I never knew existed. He claimed they'd drained savings and taken second mortgages to cover my education and my mother's medical bills. He spoke as if my mother's illness had been an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. Your mother's medical bills nearly bankrupted us, he said. The insurance didn't cover everything, and then there were the experimental treatments she insisted on trying. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, as he dismantled not only my immediate future, but my understanding of the past. Get your things and be out by Sunday, he finished coldly. I've carried this burden long enough. The next few days passed in a traumatic blur. I packed what I could into my car. Clothes, my camera equipment, and whatever mementos of my mother I could salvage. When I asked for her jewelry box, containing pieces I remembered her wearing throughout my childhood, my father claimed he'd already sold most of it to cover debts. The sentimental value doesn't pay bills, Haley, he said dismissively. I left that Sunday without saying goodbye, driving to Portland with tears blurring my vision and a hollowness in my chest that felt permanent. Within a week, I'd found a tiny studio apartment that consumed most of my savings for the security deposit. The photography assistant job I'd lined up paid barely above minimum wage, but it was a start. Over the following months, I learned that the family home had indeed been sold. My father had moved to a luxury condo in downtown Seattle. When I called to ask for my mother's remaining personal items, photos, letters, anything he might have kept, he brushed me off. I got rid of most of that stuff, he said. Too many painful memories. It was the last conversation we had for years. I blocked his number and focused on building my life from scratch. The student loans that I'd taken out weighed heavily on me, especially given my entry-level salary. There were months when I had to choose between paying the full loan payment and buying groceries. Gradually, I built a career in commercial photography. From assistant, I became an associate photographer, then started freelancing for local businesses and eventually magazines. I developed a distinctive style that emphasized authenticity and natural light. By my late 20s, I was making a decent living, though nowhere near wealthy. Throughout this time, I avoided anything to do with my father. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned he had remarried quickly less than 2 years after my mother's death. To a woman named Diane who came from money. They traveled extensively, posting photos from exotic locations on social media accounts I eventually stopped checking. The word burden followed me through these years, an unwelcome shadow that colored my perceptions of myself and my relationships. I kept people at a distance, afraid to become too dependent or attached. I lived modestly, always saving for an emergency, perpetually afraid of becoming financially vulnerable. I never spoke about my family situation to friends or colleagues. As far as most people knew, both my parents had died, a simplification that was easier than explaining the complicated truth. On the surface, I was a successful, independent woman building a career I loved. Inside, I carried wounds that had never properly healed and questions that had never been answered. 15 years after my mother's death, my life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. At 34, I owned a small but thriving photography business in Portland, specializing in commercial work for local businesses and the occasional magazine spread. My apartment was modest, but filled with art and plants, a sanctuary I had created for myself. While I dated occasionally, I had never quite managed to build a relationship that lasted, always holding back a part of myself, afraid to become too vulnerable. The call came on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. I was editing photos from a restaurant shoot when my phone rang with an unknown Seattle number. I nearly declined it, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something made me answer. "Is this Haley Thompson?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" I replied cautiously. "My name is Sarah Taylor from Taylor & Associates law firm in Seattle. I've been trying to locate you for some time. It's regarding your mother, Jessica Thompson." My heart skipped. 15 years after her death, my mother's name coming from a stranger's lips was jarring. "This is some kind of scam," I said immediately, my finger hovering over the end call button. "It's not a scam, Miss Thompson," the woman said quickly. "Your mother was a client of our firm. We've been attempting to execute certain aspects of her estate plan for many years, but haven't been able to locate you. If you could come to our office in Seattle, I can explain everything." "My father handled my mother's estate when she died," I said, the words tasting bitter. "There's nothing left to discuss." "That's not entirely accurate," Sarah Taylor replied. "There were provisions your father was not privy to. Please, this is important. I knew your mother personally." Something in her voice, a genuine earnestness, made me pause. After arranging a meeting for the following week, I hung up and sat staring at my computer screen, unable to focus on work anymore. Could this possibly be legitimate? Or was it an elaborate con, preying on my lingering grief? The following Monday, I found myself in a wood-paneled office in downtown Seattle, facing an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Sarah Taylor appeared to be in her 70s, with the sharp gaze of someone who had spent decades parsing legal complexities. "Thank you for coming, Miss Thompson," she said, gesturing to a chair. "I've been trying to find you for a very long time." "Why couldn't you find me?" I asked. "I'm not exactly hiding. You changed your name professionally, moved multiple times, and had no social media presence until relatively recently," she explained. "And your father was less than helpful when we attempted to contact him about you." My suspicion must have shown on my face, because she opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file. "Your mother came to me 17 years ago, separately from your father," she began. "She wanted to create a trust and, well, that would protect certain assets. She was very specific about the terms and timing." Sarah Taylor explained that my mother had come from family money, something I'd never known. Her parents had left her a substantial inheritance, which she had kept separate from the family finances, investing it quietly over the years. "Your mother specified that the existence of these assets was to be kept confidential until either 15 years had passed since her death or until your father had remarried, whichever came first." "He remarried years ago," I said, confused. "To a woman named Diane." Sarah nodded. "We learned that 3 years after your mother's passing. We attempted to locate you then, but you had moved from your last known address, changed your professional name to Haley Thomas for your photography business, and left no forwarding information. Your father claimed he had no contact with you and didn't know where you were." The revelation that my mother had secret assets was stunning enough, but learning she had deliberately kept them from my father and created this elaborate plan left me reeling. "Why would she do this?" I asked. "Why all the secrecy?" Sarah's expression softened. "Your mother left a letter that should explain everything. But before we get to that, I need to tell you what exactly she left behind." As the elderly lawyer continued speaking, I felt the floor shifting beneath me. My mother, the practical nurse who clipped coupons and bought my clothes on sale, had secretly been worth millions. And she had left it all to me, with the specific instruction that my father never control it. There's more, Sarah said, pulling out another folder. The family home that your father sold after your mother's death? He didn't actually have the right to sell it. What do you mean? I asked, genuinely confused. Your mother paid off the mortgage in full 2 years before her death, using her separate funds. She then transferred ownership to a trust in your name, with the provision that your father could live there until he remarried or attempted to sell it. When he listed it for sale, our firm intervened legally. But the house was sold, I insisted. I drove by it once, years ago. A different family was living there. What your father thought was a sale was actually a blocked transaction. The trust has been renting the property to tenants, with the income reinvested. The house is yours, Haley. It has been all along. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this information. For 15 years, I had believed my father's story about debt and burden. For 15 years, I had struggled with student loans and tight budgets, never knowing that my mother had provided for me in ways I couldn't have imagined. There's a letter, Sarah said gently, sliding an envelope across the desk. Your mother wrote it during her illness. She asked that you read it when the time came. With trembling fingers, I took the envelope, recognizing my mother's handwriting instantly. The past and present collided as I held this message from beyond time, from a mother to a daughter, bridging 15 years of silence. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in my hands. I stared at my name written in my mother's familiar handwriting, a ghost from the past reaching forward through time to find me. Sarah Taylor discreetly excused herself, giving me privacy for this moment. I broke the seal carefully and unfolded several pages of stationery I recognized from our old home. The letter was dated just weeks before her death. My dearest Haley, asterisk if you're reading this, then Sarah has finally found you, and enough time has passed for me to tell you the truth. There is so much I wanted to say to you in person, but protecting you meant keeping certain things secret, even from you. Asterisk first, you should know that I come from a wealthy family. My parents died when you were very young, leaving me a substantial inheritance. I chose not to change our lifestyle, or tell your father the full extent of what I received. Money changes people, Haley, and I had already begun to see changes in Curtis that worried me. Asterisk, I loved your father when we married, but over the years, I watched him become increasingly fixated on status and wealth. The man who once loved simple picnics in the park began to resent our modest home and lifestyle. He wanted more, always more, regardless of what it cost emotionally. Asterisk 3 years before my diagnosis, I discovered Curtis was having an affair with Diane Winters, a wealthy divorcee he met through his investment firm. I confronted him, and he promised to end it, claiming it was just a mistake. I wanted to believe him, for your sake. But I also began to protect myself and you financially. Asterisk, I paid off our home mortgage without telling him, transferring the deed to a trust in your name. I created a separate investment account for your college education and future security. When I became ill and realized I might not survive, I accelerated these plans, working with Sarah to ensure that you would be provided for no matter what happened. Asterisk, I suspected that once I was gone, Curtis would try to access these funds and possibly push you out of his life. He had been planning his exit for years, waiting until you were in college. My illness accelerated his timeline, but complicated his plans. Asterisk, I'm so sorry for the pain you must have endured. I hoped that Curtis would rise to the occasion after my death, that fatherly love would prevail. If you're reading this, I fear that didn't happen. Asterisk, the house is yours. The money in the trust is yours. Approximately $2 million, which should have grown over time with investments. Use it for your photography, for your dreams, for the life you deserve. Asterisk, I know money can't make up for what you've lost, but it can perhaps give you the freedom to heal and build something beautiful. That's all I've ever wanted for you. Asterisk, remember that your worth has never been determined by your father's perception. You were never a burden, Haley. You were, and always will be, my greatest joy. Asterisk, with eternal love. Asterisk, Mom. Asterisk, I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Each reading revealed new layers of my mother's love, foresight, and pain. She had known all along what my father was capable of. She had been protecting me even as she was dying, setting up safeguards that would activate years after she was gone. When Sarah returned to the office, she found me clutching the letter to my chest. "She knew," I said simply. "She knew what he would do." Sarah nodded. "Your mother was a remarkable woman. Very intelligent, very thorough. She made me promise I would find you, no matter how long it took." Over the next hour, Sarah walked me through the details of my inheritance. The house in Seattle, now worth considerably more than when my mother had paid it off. The trust fund, which had indeed grown to just over $2 million through careful investment. There were also personal items my mother had stored in a safe deposit box, jewelry, photographs, and keepsakes she hadn't wanted my father to dispose of. "What about my father's claim that they were in debt from medical bills?" I asked. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. "Your mother's medical care was fully covered by her insurance and her own separate funds. There were no debts, Haley. That was a fabrication." The reality of my father's deception was staggering. He had lied about debt to justify pushing me out. He had attempted to sell a house that wasn't his to sell. He had called me a burden while trying to access money that was never meant for him. "There's one more thing you should know," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "Your father has attempted multiple times over the years to contest your mother's separate will and gain access to these assets. Our firm has successfully blocked every attempt." "He knew," I whispered, horrified. "All this time, he knew there was money?" "He knew your mother had some family money, yes. But he didn't know the extent of it or that she had placed it all in trust for you with such specific conditions. When he learned he couldn't touch it after her death, he was quite upset." The full picture was finally coming into focus. My father's coldness after my mother's death, his rush to remove her possessions, his insistence that I leave immediately after graduation. It had all been part of his plan to move on to his new life with Diane, unencumbered by his past and furious that he couldn't access my mother's money. "What happens now?" I asked, feeling simultaneously empty and full. "Now," Sarah said with the first smile I'd seen from her, "you claim what's rightfully yours. The house, the funds, the future your mother wanted for you." As I left the law office that afternoon, I stepped onto the Seattle street feeling like a different person than when I'd arrived. The burden I'd carried for 15 years, that I was unwanted, a financial drain, somehow unworthy, began to lift, replaced by the weight of a truth that was painful but also freeing. My mother had never stopped fighting for me, even from beyond the grave. And now I would have to decide what to do with her final gift. For several days after meeting with Sarah Taylor, I wandered through my life in a daze. I took the week off work, claiming a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue. I extended my stay in Seattle, moving from my hotel to a short-term rental while I processed everything I'd learned. The question that kept circling in my mind was, should I confront my father? Part of me wanted to leave him in ignorance, to simply claim what was mine and disappear again. But another part, a stronger part, needed closure. I needed him to know that his deception had failed, that my mother had outsmarted him, and that I knew the truth. With Sarah Taylor's help, I began researching my father's current life. Through public records and social media, we discovered that he and Diane were living in an exclusive lakeside community outside Seattle. He had retired from his investment firm 5 years earlier and now spent his time golfing, traveling, and serving on the boards of several local charitable organizations, cultivating the image of a generous, community-minded retiree. "We need to proceed carefully," Sarah advised during one of our meetings. "Your father has proven himself to be manipulative and dishonest. If you want to confront him, we should do it on legally solid ground." We decided on a formal approach. Sarah would send official notification about the trust assets, including the house, being transferred to my active management now that I had been located. This would serve as the opening move, letting my father know that his past actions were now exposed. The response was almost immediate. Within hours of the legal notification being delivered, my phone, which Sarah had included in the documents, began ringing with an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. "Haley, this is your father." His voice sounded older but carried the same authoritative tone I remembered. I've received some confusing paperwork from a law firm claiming to represent you. Call me immediately so we can straighten this out. The text followed soon after. This must be some kind of mistake. These lawyers are clearly trying to scam you. Your mother and I were always transparent about our finances. I need you to call me ASAP. Each message made me more certain that confrontation was necessary. After consulting with Sarah, we arranged a meeting at her office for the following Monday. My father was informed that if he wanted to discuss the matter, that would be the appropriate venue, with legal representation present. He agreed with surprising speed. The weekend before the meeting, I visited the family home, my home, for the first time in 15 years. Sarah arranged for the current tenants to be away for a few hours, allowing me private access. Walking through those familiar rooms was surreal. The house had been redecorated by the tenants, yet the bones of it remained the same. The kitchen where my mother had taught me to bake cookies. The backyard where she had nurtured her garden. The window seat in the living room where I'd spent countless hours reading and dreaming. I ran my hand along the banister leading upstairs, remembering how I used to slide down it despite my parents' warnings. In my old bedroom, now converted to a home office, I stood by the window where I'd once photographed birds visiting the feeder my mother had installed. This house contained the physical memory of my mother in a way nothing else did. Standing there, I felt her presence more strongly than I had in years, as if she were whispering, "Welcome home, Haley." Monday arrived with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I dressed carefully in a tailored black pantsuit, projecting the successful professional I had become rather than the wounded daughter I still sometimes felt like. Sarah met me in the reception area of her firm, giving my arm a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, you have nothing to be ashamed of or defensive about," she said. "This is about truth and justice, not revenge." At precisely 10 o'clock, the receptionist announced the arrival of Curtis Thompson and his attorney. When my father walked into the conference room, I was struck by how much he had aged. His hair was completely silver now, his face lined, but he still carried himself with the same self-importance I remembered. He was dressed expensively, a gold watch glinting at his wrist. His eyes widened slightly when he saw me, perhaps surprised by the confident woman who had replaced the devastated girl he had cast aside 15 years earlier. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his face before he composed himself. "Haley," he said, his tone somewhere between surprised and cautious. "You look well." "Thank you for coming, Mr. Thompson," Sarah interjected before I could respond. "Please have a seat." My father and his lawyer, a sleek man in his 50s with an expensive suit and a permanent frown, took their places across the table. Sarah began by outlining the facts. My mother's separate trust, the house ownership, the investments, and the specific conditions that had kept these assets protected from my father's interference. As Sarah spoke, I watched my father's expression shift from feigned confusion to poorly concealed anger. His attorney whispered something to him when Sarah mentioned the multiple attempts to contest the will over the years. "This is absurd," my father finally interrupted. "Jessica and I shared everything. We had joint accounts, joint ownership. These documents must be forgeries." Sarah calmly placed a stack of papers on the table. "These are the original documents, Mr. Thompson, with your wife's signature, properly witnessed and notarized. We also have records of the fund's origins, her family inheritance, which predated your marriage and was never commingled with joint assets. As an investment advisor, you should appreciate the careful paper trail." My father's attorney examined the documents while my father sat back, his jaw working as if chewing on his response. "Even if these are legitimate," he finally said, "it was clearly not Jessica's intention to cut me out completely. We were married for 25 years. She must have been influenced by her illness or medication." It was the first time I spoke during the meeting. "She was protecting me," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside. "She knew what you would do once she was gone." My father's eyes flashed to mine. "You have no idea what went on in our marriage, Haley. You were just a child." "I know you called me a burden," I replied. "I know you kicked me out immediately after graduation, claiming financial hardship from Mom's medical bills, bills that were fully covered. I know you tried to sell a house that wasn't yours to sell. His face flushed red. You have no proof of any of that. Actually, Sarah interjected, we have quite a bit of documentation regarding your attempts to sell the property and access the trust funds. We also have testimonials from neighbors about Ms. Thompson being asked to leave the family home shortly after her college graduation. My father leaned forward, switching tactics. Look, Haley, there have clearly been misunderstandings on both sides. I was grieving too, in my own way. Perhaps I wasn't as supportive as I could have been after your mother's death. The audacity of this understatement after 15 years of abandonment was breathtaking. You told me we were in debt, I said quietly. You made me believe I was a financial drain. I struggled for years with student loans while you were living in luxury with Diane. There was no misunderstanding. You lied to me. For a moment, something like shame crossed my father's face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. Your mother should have been honest with me about her finances, he countered. She knew how hard I worked, how much I sacrificed. That money should have been used to improve our lives together. So you admit you knew she had family money? Sarah asked quickly. My father realized his mistake too late. His lawyer put a warning hand on his arm, but he was too angry to heed it. Of course I knew. Her parents left her a decent inheritance, but she was always so secretive about it, so controlling. She'd only use it for Haley's education or her precious house improvements. Never for the things I wanted: the vacations, the club memberships, the lifestyle we deserved. The truth was finally out in the open. My mother hadn't kept her inheritance secret. She had simply refused to spend it the way my father wanted. And after her death, he had expected to finally control it all. Mr. Thompson, his lawyer said firmly, I advise you not to continue this line of discussion. But my father was on a roll now, years of resentment spilling out. Do you have any idea what it was like, Haley? Working with clients who had everything, coming home to Jessica's insistence on living like we were middle class? She could have used that money to help me advance, to make connections. Instead, she hoarded it for you. She protected it for me, I corrected him. And she was right to do so. My father's attorney was now visibly uncomfortable. Perhaps we should take a brief recess. I want what's rightfully mine, my father interrupted. Half of Jessica's estate, at minimum. I'll contest this all the way to the Supreme Court if I have to. Sarah remained unruffled. You've already tried to contest it 3 times, Mr. Thompson. The trust is ironclad. The conditions were clearly established while your wife was of sound mind, with multiple witnesses. Additionally, you signed a prenuptial agreement with Diane Winters that effectively severed any remaining claims you might have had to Jessica's estate. At the mention of the prenuptial agreement, my father fell silent. His lawyer whispered urgently to him, and I could see his shoulders slump slightly as the reality of his situation sank in. What do you want, Haley? He finally asked, his voice quieter now. Money? Is that why you've come back after all these years? I met his gaze steadily. I didn't come back for anything. I didn't even know there was anything to come back for until Sarah found me. I built my life without your help, despite your cruelty. Then what is this about? He demanded. Truth, I said simply. Mom deserved to have her wishes honored. And I deserved to know that I was never the burden you claimed I was. The meeting concluded shortly after, with my father and his lawyer leaving first. Before he walked out, my father paused at the door. For what it's worth, Haley, I did love your mother. In my way. I didn't respond. Some wounds are too deep for simple apologies, some betrayals too fundamental for easy reconciliation. As the door closed behind him, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, lingering anger, but also, surprisingly, relief. The confrontation I had feared for so long was over, and I had emerged stronger for it. He'll try again to challenge the trust, Sarah warned after they had left. He's not the type to give up easily. Let him try, I said with newfound confidence. Mom outsmarted him. We'll keep it that way. Sarah smiled at me with something like pride. Your mother would be very pleased to see you now, Haley. Very pleased indeed. 1 month after the confrontation with my father, I stood in the empty living room of my childhood home, now truly mine in every sense. The previous tenant's lease had ended, and I had decided not to renew it immediately, giving myself time to decide what this house would mean in my future. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. I had hired cleaners, but the house still held the lingering scent of strangers' lives. I moved through the rooms slowly, reacquainting myself with their dimensions, noting what had changed and what remained the same. In my parents' former bedroom, my mother's room, I corrected myself mentally. I ran my hands along the built-in shelves my mother had loved. On a whim, I pressed against the back panel of the lowest shelf, remembering a trick my mother had shown me once when I was very young. To my surprise, it still moved, revealing a small hidden compartment. Inside was a metal box I had never seen before. With trembling hands, I lifted it out and carried it to the window seat. The key was taped to the bottom, just as my mother would have arranged it, practical even in secrecy. When I opened it, I found a treasure trove of memories, photographs I had never seen, letters from my grandmother to my mother, and a smaller envelope with my name on it, another letter, different from the one Sarah had given me. My sweet Haley, if you found this box, then you've remembered our special hiding place. There are things I couldn't put in my official letters, things too personal for lawyers and documents. I want you to know that the years I spent raising you were the happiest of my life. Every school play, every photograph you took, every time you crawled into my bed during a thunderstorm, these moments were my true wealth. I made mistakes in my marriage. I stayed too long with a man who had changed from the person I fell in love with. I kept secrets when perhaps honesty would have been better. But I never, ever regretted a single sacrifice I made for you. The house is yours now. Make it a home again, either for yourself or for someone else who needs it. The money is yours too. Use it wisely, but don't let it define you. Remember that you made your own way before you ever knew about this inheritance. That strength is yours forever. I love you endlessly. Mom. Along with the letter were photographs I had never seen. My mother as a young woman, carefree and laughing at a beach. My parents on their wedding day, looking genuinely happy. My mother holding me as a newborn, her expression one of pure wonder. These glimpses into her life before mine, and the early days of our family before things soured, were priceless. Over the next few weeks, I divided my time between Portland, where I was wrapping up ongoing photography projects, and Seattle, where I was reimagining my childhood home. I decided not to sell it. This place held too much of my mother to let it go. Instead, I began renovations, maintaining the character my mother had loved while updating it to reflect my own aesthetic. The front bedroom, once mine, became a home office. The dining room where we had shared countless meals was refreshed, but kept largely the same. And the sunroom at the back of the house, my mother's favorite spot, I transformed into a photography studio, with perfect natural light streaming through the windows she had so carefully positioned to capture the garden views. As I settled into this new chapter, I made decisions about the inheritance as well. With Sarah Taylor's guidance, I paid off my remaining student loans and set aside funds for the house renovation. But the bulk of the money, I decided, would go toward establishing a photography scholarship in my mother's name at my alma mater, specifically for students facing financial hardship. It felt right to honor her by helping others pursue their artistic passions, just as she had supported mine. Part of the house, the finished basement with its separate entrance, I converted into a teaching studio where I could offer photography workshops to underprivileged youth. My mother had always believed in giving back to the community, and this seemed the perfect extension of her legacy. With the physical spaces taking shape, I turned my attention to the emotional reconstruction that was equally necessary. I reached out to old friends from college, reconnecting with people I had kept at arm's length during my struggling years. I joined a therapy group for adults dealing with parental estrangement, finding solace in shared experiences and healing strategies. In one particularly powerful session, the therapist asked us to write letters to our estranged parents, not to send, but to express the feelings we had carried for so long. As I wrote to my father, I realized something surprising. Beneath the anger and hurt, I felt pity for him. He had been married to a remarkable woman, but had been too blinded by materialistic desires to appreciate her. He had a daughter who would have loved him unconditionally, yet he had measured her worth only in terms of cost and benefit. "Your father made his choices," my therapist said when I shared this insight. And in doing so, he lost the true treasures in his life. This perspective helped me move toward a kind of forgiveness, not for his benefit, but for my own. I would never forget what he had done, but I could choose not to let it define me any longer. 6 months after moving back to Seattle, I hosted a housewarming gathering. Old college friends, new colleagues from the photography community, and neighbors filled the rooms with laughter and conversation. As I moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing stories about the renovation process, I caught sight of a photograph I had placed on the mantel. My mother in her garden, smiling directly at the camera. In that moment, I felt her presence more strongly than I had in 15 years. Later that evening, after the last guest had left, I sat in the window seat with a cup of tea, looking out at the Seattle skyline glittering in the distance. The house felt alive again, filled with new energy while still honoring its past. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Taylor. "Your mother would be so proud of what you've done with everything she left you." As I typed my reply, I realized the profound truth in those words. My mother had left me far more than a house and money. She had given me an example of strength, foresight, and unconditional love. She had shown me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in how we care for the people who matter to us. She had protected me even when she knew she wouldn't be there to see the results. The greatest lesson from this 15-year journey wasn't about inheritance or justice, but about worth. For years, I had carried my father's judgment that I was a burden, a drain, something to be discarded when convenient. My mother's posthumous gift wasn't just financial security, it was the irrefutable evidence that I had always been valued, always been worthy of protection and love. As I move forward with my life, teaching photography to eager students in the studio that once was my childhood home, I often think about the nature of legacy. My father, with all his focus on wealth and status, will leave behind little of true value. My mother, who died too young, continues to touch lives through the scholarship bearing her name and through the lessons she imparted to me. The greatest inheritance wasn't the money or the house, but finally understanding my own worth. Something my mother knew all along. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden by someone who should have treasured you, I hope my story reminds you that other people's judgments don't define your value. Have you experienced something similar, or are you still healing from family wounds? Share your story in the comments below, and let's build a community of support. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories of resilience and redemption, and give this video a thumbs up if it resonated with you. Remember, sometimes the truth takes time to emerge, but healing is always possible. Thank you for being here with me today. My name is Stephanie Mitchell, and at 32, I've learned that success is sometimes best kept quiet at family gatherings. When my sister Allison announced her engagement to Bradley Thompson, I smiled and celebrated despite my reservations about his arrogance. If only I had known how he truly saw me as just the help. But life has a way of serving justice when you least expect it, especially at a dinner that would change everything. Before I share what happened that night, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated. I promise this story of sweet revenge will be worth it. Growing up, Allison and I shared more than just our parents and our home. We shared a complicated sisterly bond that was equal parts love and rivalry. Despite being only 2 years apart, we might as well have been from different planets. I was the studious one with my nose always buried in a book, while Allison was the social butterfly who could charm anyone within minutes of meeting them. Our modest middle-class upbringing in suburban Boston meant we shared a bedroom until I left for college. Those close quarters created an intimacy between us, but also highlighted our differences. Every night as I studied under a desk lamp, Allison would be on her bed, phone cradled between shoulder and ear, giggling with friends about weekend plans. Stephanie has the brains, but Allison has the people skills, our mother would often say at family gatherings, as if these attributes were mutually exclusive. Dad would nod in agreement, adding, "That's why Allison will marry well, while Stephanie will support herself." They didn't mean it unkindly, but their words carved a path we both unconsciously followed. When I brought home straight A's, there would be a quick, "good job," before conversation turned to Allison's latest social triumph, being elected homecoming queen or chosen to give a speech at graduation because of her popularity, not her grades. I learned to downplay my achievements, keeping my academic scholarships and awards quiet to avoid seeming like I was competing for attention. After high school, I worked 3 jobs to supplement my scholarships at Boston University's business school. Those years were a blur of coffee shop morning shifts, library study sessions between classes, and nighttime waitressing at an upscale restaurant where I first observed the business executives I aspired to become. While Allison attended community college and thrived in her expanding social circles, I pushed myself through undergraduate and then an MBA program, graduating with honors but substantial debt. My career began at a mid-sized financial services firm, where I quickly established myself as someone who could identify inefficiencies and implement solutions that improved the bottom line. As I climbed the corporate ladder, from analyst to manager to director and eventually to vice president, I kept my successes modest around my family. At holiday dinners, when asked about work, I'd simply say, "It's going well," before turning the conversation to others. Allison, meanwhile, bounced between jobs in retail and event planning, her natural charisma making her well-liked, but her lack of focus preventing career advancement. I never judged her choices. We were simply different people with different strengths. I secretly helped her financially sometimes, but never mentioned it, knowing her pride would be hurt. 6 months ago, Allison called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Steph, I've met someone amazing. His name is Bradley Thompson, and he works in finance like you, but he's a vice president at Thompson Financial Services." I soon learned that they had met at a charity gala where Allison was working as an event coordinator. Bradley had apparently been immediately smitten with her beauty and vivacious personality. Within weeks, they were inseparable. When I first met Bradley at a dinner Allison arranged, I was struck by his conventionally handsome features and designer clothes. He had the polished look of someone who came from money and knew it. His charisma filled the room as he shared stories about his boarding school days and his Yale education. But I also noticed how he subtly spoke over me when I mentioned my own alma mater, and how his eyes glazed over when conversation turned to anything outside his immediate interests. "Your sister is quite different from you," he commented when Allison stepped away to the restroom. "She has such natural grace in social settings." The compliment to my sister carried an implicit criticism of me that I chose to ignore. Throughout that dinner, I observed how Bradley controlled the conversation, ordered for Allison without consulting her preferences, and name-dropped constantly. Red flags waved frantically in my mind, but Allison seemed happier than I'd seen her in years, her eyes shining whenever she looked at him. "What do you think?" she asked eagerly as we hugged goodbye that night. "He seems very successful," I replied diplomatically. "Are you happy?" Deliriously, she gushed. "And his family practically owns half of Boston's financial district. Can you imagine me in that world?" I could, actually, and it worried me. But I smiled and said, "As long as he treats you well, that's what matters." 3 months into their relationship, Allison called me at midnight, her voice trembling with excitement. He proposed. Bradley proposed tonight at Le Bernardin. "The ring is 4 carats, Steph, 4 carats. We're thinking a June wedding. And I need you to help me plan everything. You're so good with details and organization." I swallowed my concerns and congratulated her with all the enthusiasm I could muster. "I'd be honored to help," I said, making a mental note to watch Bradley more carefully in the coming months. If he truly made my sister happy, I would support her completely. But at the first sign that he was mistreating her, all bets would be off. "Oh, and Bradley suggested we meet next Saturday to start planning. He knows this amazing wedding planner who works with all the Boston elite. Just wait until you see the venues he's considering, only the very best for a Thompson wedding. As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this whirlwind romance was heading for stormy weather. But for now, I would be the supportive sister Allison needed me to be, even if that meant dealing with her increasingly insufferable fiancé. The following Saturday arrived with unusually warm spring sunshine, a stark contrast to the cold reception I would receive. Allison had texted me the address of Maison Laurent, one of Boston's most exclusive French restaurants, for our first wedding planning meeting. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a conservative navy blazer and pencil skirt, my standard business attire. "Ms. Mitchell," the maitre d' greeted me at the entrance. "The rest of your party has already arrived. Please follow me." I was surprised that Bradley and Allison had beaten me there, given my early arrival. As I approached the private dining area, I could hear Bradley's booming laugh and the tinkling of champagne glasses. Seated at the table were Allison, Bradley, and an impeccably dressed woman with a leather portfolio who I assumed was the wedding planner. They already had champagne and appeared to be celebrating. "Stephanie." Allison jumped up to hug me. "Isn't this place amazing?" "Bradley comes here all the time for business lunches." Bradley barely looked up from his phone as he offered a distracted, "Hello, Stephanie." No offer of a handshake, no champagne poured for me. "This is Vivienne Montclair," Allison introduced the elegant woman. "She's planned weddings for actual Kennedys." Vivienne extended her hand with a practiced smile. "Pleasure to meet you." Allison mentioned you'll be helping with some of the smaller details. I shook her hand firmly. "I'm looking forward to supporting my sister however I can." As I took my seat, Bradley continued scrolling through his phone. When the waiter approached to take my drink order, Bradley interjected before I could speak. "She'll just have water." "We need to keep someone clear-headed for taking notes," he said with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Allison laughed nervously. "Oh, Steph doesn't mind. She's always the responsible one." I smiled tightly, but said nothing, not wanting to create tension at our first meeting. Vivienne opened her portfolio. Now, as I was saying before Stephanie arrived, the Fairmont Copley Plaza has an opening for the second Saturday in June. It's the perfect venue for the 400 guests on your preliminary list. 400? I couldn't help but interject. "Allison, I thought you always wanted a more intimate wedding." Bradley finally put his phone down. "The Thompsons have social obligations. My father's business associates alone account for 100 invitations. Plus, Bradley's mother says anything less would look like we're cutting corners," Allison added, though I noticed she wouldn't meet my eyes. For the next hour, I watched as Bradley dominated every decision, from the 7-course menu to the selection of Calacatta marble for the custom dance floor. Each time I offered a suggestion, he would either talk over me or dismiss the idea outright. When I mentioned that Allison had always loved peonies for flowers, Bradley scoffed. "Peonies? No. Vivienne, we discussed orchids imported from Thailand. The budget is unlimited, as I mentioned." Vivienne nodded, making a note without acknowledging my input. As the meeting progressed, I tried to catch Allison's eye, but she seemed entranced by the extravagant plans unfolding. This wasn't the wedding she had described to me over late-night ice cream sessions in our youth. She had always wanted something meaningful and personal, not this exercise in excess and showing off. The breaking point came when the discussion turned to the bridal party. "Allison mentioned you'll be the maid of honor," Vivienne said to me. "We'll need your measurements for the custom Vera Wang." Before I could respond, Bradley interrupted again. "Actually, we've been discussing that. My cousin Fiona really should have that honor given the family connections. But Stephanie, we'd love your help coordinating things. Like keeping track of RSVPs, arranging transportation for out-of-town guests, that sort of thing." Allison looked startled. "Bradley, we never discussed, darling. We talked about the importance of making the right social connections for our future," he said, patting her hand condescendingly. "Stephanie understands. She's happy to be the help, aren't you, Stephanie?" The table fell silent. Even Vivienne looked uncomfortable. "The help?" I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. Bradley waved his hand dismissively. "You know what I mean. You're so good with organization and details." Fiona couldn't manage a grocery list, but she's a Thompson. It's just how these things work. I looked at Allison, waiting for her to defend me, to remind Bradley that I was her only sister. Brad's just stressed from work, she finally said weakly. But maybe it would be easier if you handled the behind-the-scenes stuff, Steph. You're so good at that. I felt as though I'd been slapped. Taking a deep breath, I placed my napkin on the table and stood up. I think I've heard enough for today. Allison, call me when you want to talk, just as sisters. As I walked away, I heard Bradley mutter, so sensitive. This is why people from your background struggle in higher circles, Allison. They don't understand how things work. That evening, Allison called me repeatedly, but I let the calls go to voicemail. I needed time to process what had happened and decide how to support my sister without enabling Bradley's disrespect. The following Monday, I was returning from a business lunch when my assistant informed me that the CEO of Meridian Enterprises had called personally and requested I contact him immediately. Meridian was one of the largest financial services companies on the East Coast and a major competitor to Thomson Financial, where Bradley worked. I had met their board chairman, Jonathan Reynolds, at an industry conference where I had presented on innovative risk management strategies. Curious and slightly concerned, I returned the call immediately. Stephanie, thank you for getting back to me so quickly. Jonathan's warm voice came through the line. I'll get straight to the point. Our CEO is retiring, and after seeing your work and hearing your presentation at the conference, the board unanimously agrees that you're exactly who we need to take Meridian into the future. We'd like to offer you the position. I nearly dropped the phone. CEO of Meridian Enterprises? It was the opportunity of a lifetime, one I had worked toward my entire career, but hadn't expected for at least another decade. As Jonathan outlined the generous compensation package and the board's strategic vision, one detail caught my attention. They wanted to keep the announcement confidential until their annual investor meeting, which was 6 weeks away. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Not only had I just been offered a dream position, but it was at the very company that competed directly with Bradley's firm. The same Bradley who had just dismissed me as the help. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony after all. The morning after Jonathan's call, I found myself in Meridian's sleek headquarters, signing a confidentiality agreement before meeting with the board of directors. The top-floor conference room offered panoramic views of Boston Harbor, but I was too focused on the 12 people seated around the table to appreciate the scenery. Ms. Mitchell, your reputation precedes you, said Eleanor Banks, the silver-haired chairwoman of the board. Your work implementing blockchain technology at your current firm increased their security capabilities while reducing costs by 22%. Impressive. Not to mention the award-winning risk assessment protocol you developed during the financial crisis, added another board member. It's now being taught at Harvard Business School. I thanked them but stayed humble. I've been fortunate to work with excellent teams. And that's precisely why we want you, Jonathan said. Your technical knowledge is exceptional, but your leadership style, collaborative yet decisive, is what Meridian needs now. The meeting progressed with discussions about my vision for the company. They listened intently as I outlined potential strategies for expanding Meridian's digital offerings while maintaining their traditional strengths in wealth management. We've been losing ground to more aggressive firms like Thomson Financial, Jonathan admitted. They've been poaching our clients with promises of higher returns, but their risk management is questionable at best. I kept my face neutral at the mention of Bradley's company, though internally I noted the irony. I believe we can compete effectively without compromising our integrity, I replied. Sustainable growth beats flashy short-term gains every time. By meeting's end, I had officially accepted the position. The contract included a substantial base salary, performance bonuses, stock options, and a corner office with that same magnificent harbor view. The board requested my discretion until the official announcement at their investor meeting in 6 weeks. We want to make a splash, Jonathan explained. And giving our competitors time to react before we unveil our new strategy isn't prudent. I agreed completely, signed the contract, and scheduled a series of confidential preparation meetings to ease my transition. As I left Meridian's building, I felt a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. This was my moment, the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. Yet I couldn't share it with anyone, not even Allison. Speaking of my sister, she had left a dozen messages, each increasingly apologetic about Bradley's behavior. I finally called her back that evening. "Steph, I'm so sorry about Saturday," she gushed immediately. "Bradley didn't mean it the way it sounded." "How exactly should I have interpreted being called the help, Allison?" I asked quietly. "He's just under tremendous pressure at work. Thompson Financial is bidding for this huge client, and he's leading the team. He's barely sleeping." The justifications were exactly what I expected. I sighed, deciding to keep the peace for now. "I understand stress, Ollie. But that doesn't excuse disrespect." I know. He wants to apologize in person. We're having a small engagement party next weekend at his parents' estate in Cambridge. Please come, it would mean everything to me." I hesitated, then relented. "For you, Ollie. Not for him." The following Saturday, I arrived at the Thompson estate, a sprawling colonial mansion with manicured gardens and a view of the Charles River. Valets in crisp uniforms parked guests' cars while servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Allison rushed over, radiant in a designer dress I knew she couldn't afford on her event planner salary. "You came. And you look beautiful." I had indeed made an effort, wearing a simple but elegant black cocktail dress with subtle pearl accessories, professional yet appropriate for the occasion. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, hugging her. "It's quite the event for a small gathering." She laughed nervously. "Bradley's mother took over the planning. There are at least 200 people here, mostly Thompson Financial clients and partners." As we moved through the crowd, I noticed several prominent Boston business figures, including a few I knew from industry events. I kept a low profile, not wanting to draw attention to my own business connections. After about an hour of mingling, during which Bradley seemed to be avoiding me, I stepped into a quiet hallway to check my phone. I had received an email from Jonathan regarding our first confidential strategy meeting scheduled for Monday. "There you are." Bradley's voice boomed behind me, making me quickly lock my phone screen. He was slightly flushed, likely from the several drinks I'd seen him consume. "The caterer said one of the servers was hiding back here on her phone. Should have known it was you." I stared at him in disbelief. "Excuse me?" He gestured vaguely at my black dress. "You blend right in with the staff. Actually, since you're here, some of the guests in the garden room need their champagne refreshed." "Bradley," I said evenly, "I'm not a server. I'm your fiancé's sister and a guest at this party." He blinked, then let out a forced laugh. "Just a joke, Stephanie. Lighten up. Everyone knows the Mitchell sisters have different skill sets. Allison got the looks and charm, you got the whatever it is you do." I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath and decided this wasn't the time for confrontation. "I should find Allison." "Before you do," he said, blocking my path slightly, "I wanted to invite you to dinner next Thursday. My boss is in town, and Allison mentioned you work in finance too. Thought you might enjoy meeting someone from the big leagues." His condescending smile made it clear he considered this a generous gesture. "How thoughtful," I replied neutrally. "Who knows?" He continued. "Play your cards right, and maybe you could learn something about real business. Might even be able to refer you for something entry-level at Thompson." The audacity nearly made me laugh. Instead, I simply nodded. "Thursday dinner. I'll be there." As I walked away, I heard him call after me, dressed professionally. "Jonathan Reynolds doesn't suffer fools or poor presentation." I froze momentarily at the mention of Jonathan's name, but didn't turn around. So Bradley's boss was none other than the chairman of Meridian's board, the very man who had just hired me as CEO. The man who would soon be introducing me as Bradley's superior. Sometimes the universe doesn't just have a sense of irony, it has a sense of justice. Over the next few days, while maintaining my current job, I secretly met with Meridian's executive team to prepare for my transition. I reviewed financial statements, strategic plans, and personnel files, absorbing everything about the company that would soon be under my leadership. Meanwhile, Allison had returned to planning her extravagant wedding, seemingly having forgotten Bradley's dismissive treatment of me. When we spoke, it was all about floral arrangements and seating charts, never about how he spoke to me or treated her. As Thursday approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and ethical concern. I hadn't revealed to anyone, not Jonathan, not Allison, about the connection between Bradley and me. Part of me wondered if I should disclose it to Jonathan before the dinner, but another part recognized that Bradley had created this situation himself through his arrogance and assumptions. In the end, I decided to let events unfold naturally. I wasn't orchestrating some elaborate revenge. I was simply allowing reality to assert itself. If Bradley had bothered to treat me with basic respect or even simple curiosity about my career, he might have avoided the embarrassment that awaited him. The night before the dinner, Allison called, bubbling with excitement. Brad says this dinner is really important. His boss is considering him for a huge promotion. Isn't that amazing? If he gets it, we might upgrade the honeymoon from the Maldives to a private yacht in the Mediterranean. That would be something, I replied noncommittally. I'm sure it will be an interesting evening. Thank you for doing this, Steph. I know you and Brad got off on the wrong foot, but this means a lot to him. He specifically requested you come. I smiled to myself. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Thursday evening arrived with a light spring rain that left Boston glistening under streetlights. I selected my attire carefully, a tailored charcoal suit with subtle burgundy accents, professional yet confident. This wasn't about embarrassing Bradley. It was about carrying myself with the dignity his behavior had lacked. The restaurant Bradley had chosen was Luca's, one of Boston's most exclusive Italian establishments, where reservations typically required months of advance notice unless you had connections. I arrived precisely on time, handed my car to the valet, and approached the maitre d'. Good evening. I'm joining the Thompson party. The man consulted his tablet. Miss Mitchell. The other guests have already arrived. Please follow me. He led me through the dimly lit main dining room, where soft conversations and the gentle clink of fine china created an atmosphere of muted elegance. We continued to a private dining area in the back, separated from the main restaurant by frosted glass doors. As the doors opened, I saw Bradley standing near a window, gesturing animatedly while speaking to an older man whose back was to me. Allison sat at the table, looking beautiful but slightly uncomfortable in a dress that seemed chosen more for Bradley's taste than her own. Your final guest has arrived, sir, the maitre d' announced. Bradley turned, his expression shifting from annoyance at the interruption to a forced smile when he saw me. Stephanie. Right on time. He approached, lowering his voice. Remember what I said, best behavior. Jonathan Reynolds is not only my boss, but also one of the most influential men in Boston finance. Before I could respond, the older man turned around, and I found myself face to face with Jonathan. His momentary surprise quickly transformed into a warm smile of recognition. Stephanie Mitchell, he said, extending his hand. What an unexpected pleasure. Bradley looked between us, confusion evident on his face. You two know each other? Jonathan clasped my hand firmly. Indeed we do. MS. Mitchell delivered a brilliant presentation at the Eastern Finance Conference last fall. Her innovative approach to digital security and financial services was the talk of the event. Bradley forced a laugh. Small world. Stephanie never mentioned meeting you. She's my fiancé's sister, he added, as if that explained my existence. Is that so? Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Well, she's being characteristically modest. Stephanie is one of the brightest minds in our industry. Allison had approached during this exchange, her expression a mixture of confusion and pride. Steph, you never told me you knew Bradley's boss. I smiled gently at my sister. It never came up. The maitre d' invited us to be seated, and Jonathan immediately gestured for me to take the seat beside him, much to Bradley's visible displeasure. As we settled in, Bradley attempted to reclaim control of the situation. Jonathan was just telling me about Meridian's exciting new direction, he said, reaching for his wine glass. Apparently, they've finally found a CEO to replace Harrison after his retirement announcement. Indeed we have, Jonathan replied, his eyes twinkling as he glanced at me. In fact, that's partly why I wanted to have dinner tonight. Bradley leaned forward eagerly. I've heard rumors it might be someone from Thompson Financial. If you're looking at our talent pool, I'd be honored to throw my hat in the ring. Jonathan chuckled. I'm afraid the position has already been filled. We conducted an extensive search and found exactly the right person to lead Meridian into its next chapter. Anyone I might know? Bradley asked, clearly hoping for information he could leverage. Jonathan paused as the server arrived with appetizers. After they departed, he turned to address the table at large. I wasn't planning to make this announcement until our investor meeting next week, but since we're among friends. He raised his glass. I'd like to toast Meridian's new Chief Executive Officer, Stephanie Mitchell, who will be taking the helm effective the 1st of next month. The silence that followed was absolute. Bradley's face drained of color, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. Allison's eyes widened to an almost comical degree as she looked at me in shock. I don't understand, Bradley finally managed, his voice strained. It's quite simple, Jonathan replied. After observing Stephanie's remarkable work over the past few years, our board unanimously agreed she has exactly the vision and leadership qualities Meridian needs. We're fortunate she accepted our offer. Bradley set his glass down with enough force that wine sloshed over the rim. But she's just what, Bradley? Jonathan asked, his tone still pleasant, but eyes suddenly sharp. I watched Bradley struggle to recalibrate in real time. His shock morphed into an unconvincing smile as he realized the precarious position he'd put himself in. Just someone I've always recognized has tremendous potential, he finished smoothly. In fact, I was telling Allison just the other day what an asset Stephanie is to any organization fortunate enough to have her. Allison's bewildered expression made it clear this was a blatant lie, but she remained silent. Jonathan turned to me. Stephanie, I hope you don't mind my jumping the gun on our announcement. I simply couldn't resist when the opportunity presented itself. Not at all, I replied calmly, though I had hoped to tell my sister privately first. I reached over to squeeze Allison's hand. Her fingers were cold, but she returned the pressure. This is, wow, Steph, she whispered. CEO of Meridian? That's incredible. Bradley cleared his throat. Absolutely incredible. Allison's always said her big sister was destined for great things. The remainder of the dinner proceeded with excruciating politeness. Bradley attempted to salvage his dignity by claiming insider knowledge of my capabilities, while Jonathan deliberately steered the conversation toward Meridian's future plans that would directly compete with Thompson Financial's strategies. As dessert was served, Bradley excused himself to use the restroom. After he'd gone, Jonathan leaned toward me. I had no idea you were connected to Bradley Thompson, he said quietly. You should have mentioned it. Professionally, we aren't connected, I replied. And my sister's relationship with him didn't seem relevant to my qualifications for the position. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. Fair enough. Though it does create an interesting dynamic, given that Meridian and Thompson Financial are direct competitors. I assure you I understand the ethical boundaries, I said firmly. My personal relationships won't affect my professional judgment. I never doubted that for a moment, Jonathan replied. When Bradley returned, his composure seemed restored, though a tightness around his eyes betrayed his inner turmoil. As the evening wound down, he insisted on paying the bill despite Jonathan's protests. I insist, Bradley said. It's not every day we celebrate such a surprising career advancement. As we prepared to leave, Bradley pulled me aside while Jonathan was helping Allison with her coat. What the hell was that? He hissed, his genial mask slipping. You deliberately set me up to look like a fool. I did nothing of the sort, I replied calmly. You managed that entirely on your own. You could have warned me you knew Jonathan. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? I told him you were the help, for God's sake. Perhaps that's a lesson in not underestimating people, I suggested. Especially women you consider beneath your notice. His face flushed with anger. This isn't over, Stephanie. You may be hot stuff at Meridian, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. The Thompsons have influence throughout Boston's financial world. Is everything all right? Jonathan's voice broke in as he approached with Allison. Bradley's expression instantly transformed. Absolutely. Just congratulating my future sister-in-law properly. Family is so important to the Thompsons, you know. Indeed, Jonathan replied, though his tone suggested skepticism. Stephanie, may I walk you to your car? There's one more matter I'd like to discuss before tomorrow's meeting. As we stepped outside, leaving Bradley and Allison in the restaurant foyer, Jonathan spoke quietly. I've known Bradley Thompson for 5 years, Stephanie. He's ambitious, but ultimately mediocre, riding on his family name rather than genuine talent. Whatever he just said to you, don't let it unsettle you. I appreciate your concern, but I can handle Bradley, I assured him. I have no doubt of that, Jonathan smiled. That's precisely why you're going to make an exceptional CEO. As Jonathan departed, I waited for Allison and Bradley to emerge from the restaurant. The night had unfolded in ways none of us could have predicted, and I knew the fallout was just beginning. The valet had just returned with my car when Allison and Bradley emerged from the restaurant. Allison hurried toward me while Bradley lingered by the entrance, furiously typing on his phone. Steph, can we talk for a minute? Allison asked, her voice trembling slightly. I'm still processing all of this. Of course, I replied, stepping away from my car. I wanted to tell you about the position, but the board required complete confidentiality until the official announcement. Before Allison could respond, Bradley strode over, his face a mask of forced composure. Ladies, why don't we continue this conversation somewhere more private? The Thompson boat is docked nearby. We could have a nightcap and properly celebrate Stephanie's achievement. Something in his tone made me wary, but Allison was already nodding enthusiastically. That sounds perfect. We haven't shown Steph the boat yet. 20 minutes later, we were aboard Thompson Legacy, a sleek 60-foot yacht docked at Boston Harbor. Despite the luxurious setting, all gleaming wood and soft leather, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Bradley poured 3 glasses of scotch at the boat's small bar, handing them to Allison and me before raising his in a mock toast. To Stephanie, the dark horse no one saw coming. I accepted the glass but didn't drink. Thank you for the sentiment, insincere as it may be. Allison looked between us nervously. Can we just have a nice family moment? This is huge news, Steph. I'm so proud of you. Bradley scoffed, abandoning all pretense now that we were away from Jonathan. Family moment? Your sister deliberately humiliated me in front of my boss, Allison. She knew exactly what she was doing. That's not true, I countered calmly. I accepted a position I'm qualified for. The fact that Jonathan happens to be your boss is coincidental. Coincidental? Bradley's voice rose. You expect me to believe that? You've been plotting this from the beginning, worming your way into Meridian to undermine me. Allison placed a hand on his arm. Brad, that doesn't make sense. How would Steph even know Jonathan was considering her for CEO before tonight? He shook her off. Don't be naive, Allison. Your sister has always been jealous of you of us. She couldn't stand that you found someone successful while she's been married to her job. I set my untouched drink down. Bradley, I understand you're embarrassed about how tonight unfolded. But your accusations are both unfounded and unfair. Unfair? He laughed bitterly, moving to the far end of the cabin. I'll tell you what's unfair. People like you thinking you deserve a place at the table with families like mine. People like me? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Yes, people like you and your sister, he continued, gesturing dismissively. From your background. The right schools, the right connections, these things matter in our world, Stephanie. You can play CEO for now, but you'll never truly belong. Allison gasped. Bradley, what are you saying? He turned to her, his expression softening artificially. Darling, I'm just being honest. You're different, you have a natural grace that transcends your origins. But your family, they'll never fit into the circles we move in. I watched my sister's face as the implications of his words sank in. The hurt in her eyes was quickly replaced by something I hadn't seen in years, the fierce determination that we'd both inherited from our mother. Our origins? Allison repeated slowly. You mean our middle-class upbringing? Our public school education? Our parents who worked honest jobs their whole lives? Bradley seemed to realize he'd gone too far. That's not what I meant, Allison. Your family is charming. But there are realities to the world we'll be living in. The world we'll be living in, she echoed. And what world is that exactly? One where you dismiss my sister as the help? Where you expect me to be ashamed of where I come from? You're twisting my words, Bradley protested, but the damage was done. I moved to stand beside my sister. Allison, I think Bradley has made his views quite clear. Crystal clear, she agreed, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. She twisted the enormous engagement ring off her finger and placed it on the polished bar. I believe this belongs to you. Bradley stared at the ring in disbelief. You can't be serious. You're throwing away everything we have because of one misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, Allison replied. It's clarity. I've been ignoring the warning signs for months. How you talk down to waitstaff, how you dismiss anyone you consider beneath you, how you've been slowly trying to separate me from my family. Allison, be reasonable, Bradley pleaded, his tone shifting to one I recognized as manipulation. Think about what you're giving up. The lifestyle, the connections, the security. What about respect? She countered. What about being valued for who I am, not how I look on your arm or how well I can be molded to fit your world? I remained silent, allowing my sister to find her voice, the strong, clear voice I'd always known was there beneath her desire to please others. Bradley's expression hardened. This is your influence, he said, pointing at me. You've never wanted Allison to be happy. On the contrary, I replied quietly. Her happiness is all I've ever wanted. Which is why I've bitten my tongue despite watching you undermine her confidence and dismiss her opinions for months. I don't have to listen to this, Bradley snapped. Especially not from someone who only got her position through some diversity initiative or affirmative action program. Allison stepped forward, her eyes flashing. Enough. My sister earned everything she has through hard work and brilliance. Something you wouldn't recognize because you've had everything handed to you your entire life. Bradley's face contorted with anger. You know nothing about my life or what I've earned. I know that in the 6 months we've been together, you've never once asked about my dreams or valued my opinions, Allison said, her voice breaking slightly. I know that you see me as an accessory, not a partner. And I know I deserve better. From the dock, we heard a car door slam and footsteps approaching the boat. A moment later, Jonathan Reynolds appeared at the cabin entrance, looking concerned. I apologize for the intrusion, he said. I left my briefcase in Stephanie's car and saw you all head this way. His eyes took in the scene, Allison's tears, Bradley's anger, the abandoned engagement ring on the bar. Bradley immediately attempted to compose himself. Jonathan, just a little family disagreement. Nothing to concern yourself with. Jonathan's gaze moved to Allison, then to me. Is everything all right, ladies? Actually, no, Allison answered before I could speak. But it will be. I was just leaving. She turned to me. Steph, would you mind giving me a ride? Of course, I replied, placing a supportive arm around her shoulders. As we moved toward the exit, Bradley called after us. Allison, don't do this. Think about what you're throwing away. My sister paused, but didn't turn around. I'm not throwing anything away, Bradley. I'm choosing myself. Jonathan stepped aside to let us pass, then addressed Bradley in a tone that was professional yet cold. I think we should reschedule our strategy meeting tomorrow, Mr. Thompson. Take some time to reflect. As we walked down the dock toward the parking area, Allison finally let her tears fall freely. I held her close, feeling her body shake with suppressed sobs. I'm so sorry, Ollie, I whispered. I never wanted this to happen. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. Don't apologize. You didn't cause this. You just happened to be the catalyst that revealed who he really is. She attempted a watery smile. And anyway, one of us should have a happy ending tonight. CEO of Meridian, Steph. I can't believe it. As we reached my car, I could see Jonathan speaking intensely to Bradley on the deck of the yacht. Whatever was being said, Bradley's face had lost all color. Come on, I said gently to Allison. Let's go home. The drive from Boston Harbor to my downtown apartment was mostly silent. Allison stared out the passenger window, occasionally wiping away tears while I focused on navigating the late-night traffic, giving her the space she needed. When we arrived, I led her inside and went through the comforting motions of making tea, something our mother had always done during difficult times. The familiar ritual seemed to soothe Allison, who curled up on my couch wrapped in the oversized throw blanket she'd given me last Christmas. "I can't believe I was so blind," she finally said, accepting the steaming mug of chamomile I offered. All the signs were there. I settled beside her. "Don't be hard on yourself. Bradley is charming and manipulative, a dangerous combination. But you saw through him immediately," she sighed. "I should have trusted your judgment." "It's different when you're in love," I replied gently. "Emotion clouds perception. That's human, not a failure." She took a sip of tea, then looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "Did you really not know Jonathan Reynolds was Bradley's boss when you took the job?" I shook my head. I knew Jonathan was chairman at Meridian, but I had no idea of his connection to Bradley until that dinner invitation. Boston's financial world is surprisingly small, but not that small. She nodded, accepting this. "And the CEO position." "Steph, that's incredible. Why didn't you ever tell me you were operating at that level?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "I knew you were successful, but CEO of a major financial firm? That's big leagues. You always downplayed your career around the family." I considered her words carefully. "I suppose I did. It just seemed easier that way." "Easier than what?" "Easier than." I hesitated, then decided honesty was what we both needed. Easier than dealing with the comparisons. Mom and Dad always made such a fuss about your social achievements while treating my academic and professional ones as expected. After a while, it just became habit to minimize my successes. Allison's eyes widened. "You thought I would be jealous?" "Steph, I've always been in awe of you. Your focus, your intelligence, your quiet confidence. Do you know how intimidating that was growing up as your little sister?" Now it was my turn to be surprised. "Intimidating?" "But you were always the golden child, beautiful, popular, effortlessly charming. Everything came so easily to you." She laughed, the sound halfway between amusement and disbelief. "Nothing came easily except making friends. I struggled through school while watching you ace every test without seeming to try. I dated losers while you built this amazing career. Even my engagement to Bradley was partly because I thought finally I had achieved something impressive." "Oh, Ollie." I reached for her hand. "I had no idea you felt that way. I've spent years envying your natural social grace and ability to connect with people. Business skills can be learned, but what you have is innate." We sat in silence for a moment, each processing the other's perspective. "We're a pair, aren't we?" Allison finally said. "Both envying what the other has instead of recognizing our own strengths." "A very Mitchell family trait," I agreed with a small smile. "Dad's still bitter that Uncle Joe has a bigger boat, even though Dad's the one with the vacation home." That drew a genuine laugh from Allison. "Remember how Mom redecorated the entire living room after Aunt Sarah updated her kitchen? Competitive to the core, those two." Our laughter faded into comfortable silence until Allison spoke again, her voice smaller. "What am I going to do now, Steph?" "I quit my job to plan the wedding. I moved most of my things to Bradley's condo. I have to start all over." "Not all over," I corrected her. "You're still you, still talented, resilient, and now wiser. And you're definitely not alone. The wedding deposits alone will take me months to pay back if I can even get refunds." "Don't worry about that right now," I assured her. "You can stay here as long as you need, and we'll sort everything else out together." She nodded gratefully, then hesitated. "There's something else. Something Bradley said tonight that keeps echoing in my head." "What's that?" "He accused you of being jealous of us. Is there any truth to that? Have you been lonely, Steph?" The question pierced deeper than I expected. "I've been focused on my career, not lonely," I replied automatically, then reconsidered. "But yes, sometimes I wonder what I've sacrificed for professional success. Watching you fall in love, plan a future with someone, it did make me question my choices occasionally." "But you don't regret them?" I thought about the journey that had led me to this moment, the late nights, the sacrifices, the satisfaction of building something meaningful. No, I don't regret them. My path is different from yours, but it's still valid. And now as CEO, I'll have the chance to create the kind of workplace culture I've always believed in, one that values both excellence and humanity. Allison smiled genuinely for the first time that night. You're going to be amazing, Steph. I'm so proud of you. She yawned, the emotional exhaustion of the evening finally catching up to her. Time for sleep, I suggested, standing and collecting our mugs. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out next steps. Tomorrow, she agreed, her eyes already drifting closed. And Steph? Thank you. Not just for tonight, but for always being there, even when I didn't realize I needed you. Over the following days, Allison moved her belongings from Bradley's condo while he was at work, leaving her key and a brief note. He sent dozens of texts and left multiple voicemails, cycling between apologies, accusations, and attempts to make her jealous. She didn't respond to any of them. Meanwhile, I began my transition to Meridian, wrapping up projects at my current firm while secretly meeting with Meridian's executive team to prepare for my new role. Jonathan kept me updated on the fallout at Thompson Financial. Bradley had been removed from several key accounts after clients expressed concerns about his judgment. Not directly because of your sister, of course, Jonathan explained during one of our meetings. But the incident prompted a closer look at some of his risk assessments, which weren't holding up to scrutiny. 2 weeks after the disastrous dinner, Allison received a lavish flower arrangement at my apartment. The card read simply, "I was wrong. Please call me." She placed the flowers on our elderly neighbor's doorstep with a kind note, then blocked Bradley's number on her phone. That same evening, as we shared takeout Chinese food at my dining table, Allison surprised me with an announcement. "I've been thinking about what to do next," she said, expertly wielding her chopsticks. "I don't want to go back to event planning for other people. What are you considering instead?" I asked. "I want to start my own business," she replied, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "A boutique event management firm specializing in corporate functions and charity galas. I've made so many connections in that world, and I understand what works and what doesn't." I nodded encouragingly. "You'd be excellent at that. Your natural people skills combined with your experience, it's perfect." "I was hoping you might help me with the business plan," she added hesitantly. "I know you're busy with the new position, but I'd be honored," I interrupted. "That's what sisters are for." The following weekend, I helped Allison outline her business concept, drawing on my experience to help her develop financial projections and marketing strategies. For the first time in our adult lives, we were truly collaborating, each contributing our distinct strengths toward a common goal. As Meridian's official announcement of my appointment approached, I received an unexpected call from our parents. "Stephanie, is it true?" my father asked without preamble. "Your mother heard from Aunt Linda, who heard from her neighbor who works at Meridian that you're becoming their CEO." I smiled at the familiar family grapevine. "Yes, Dad, it's true. The announcement goes public tomorrow." There was a pause, then. "Why didn't you tell us something this important?" "I was under a confidentiality agreement until the official announcement," I explained. "And to be honest, I wasn't sure how to bring it up." "Not sure how to tell your own parents that you've reached the pinnacle of your field?" He sounded genuinely perplexed. "It's just that my career achievements haven't always seemed to interest you and Mom as much as other things." Another pause, longer this time. "Stephanie Mitchell, that is simply not true. We've always been proud of you." "You have a funny way of showing it sometimes," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Well, we're showing it now," my mother chimed in, apparently on an extension. "We're hosting a celebration dinner this Sunday, and we won't take no for an answer. Allison's already agreed to come." I felt a warmth spread through me. "Then I'll be there too." That Sunday dinner proved to be a turning point. My parents' home was decorated with congratulatory banners, and they'd invited our extended family to celebrate. For the first time, I found myself center stage at a family gathering, with my father proudly recounting my career achievements, many of which I was surprised he even knew about. I've kept every newspaper clipping and industry mention, he admitted when I questioned him. Just because I don't always understand the technical details doesn't mean I'm not paying attention. Later, as Allison and I helped clear the dishes, my mother pulled me aside. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I think I've always focused more on Allison because she seemed to need the encouragement. You were always so capable, so self-sufficient. I never worried about you the way I worried about her. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted. Because in not worrying, I may have failed to celebrate you properly. That ends today. As we rejoined the family gathering, I noticed Allison deep in conversation with our cousin Mark, who ran a successful marketing agency. She caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up, another potential ally for her new business venture. In the 6 months that followed, life changed dramatically for both Mitchell sisters. I officially took the helm at Meridian Enterprises, implementing a strategic plan that emphasized sustainable growth and technological innovation. Under my leadership, the company's stock rose 15% in the first quarter, and we successfully acquired 2 smaller firms that strengthened our market position. Most satisfying of all was winning the Henderson account, a major client that Bradley had been pursuing for Thompson Financial. When Jonathan informed me that we were being considered alongside Thompson, I recused myself from the pitch process due to potential conflict of interest. Our team won anyway, on the strength of our superior risk management approach. Allison, meanwhile, launched Mitchell Events, starting small but quickly gaining clients through her extensive network and impeccable reputation. She specialized in charity galas and corporate functions that balanced elegance with social consciousness, events that made a statement while making a difference. To her surprise and mine, she discovered a talent for the business side of her venture. The same social intelligence that made her popular in school translated into an intuitive understanding of client needs and market trends. Within months, she had hired 2 assistants and was turning a modest profit. One evening in late autumn, as the first snow of the season dusted Boston, Allison and I met for dinner at a quiet neighborhood restaurant, a far cry from the opulent settings of Bradley's world, but warm and genuine in a way those places never were. I signed the lease today, Allison announced as we clinked glasses. Mitchell Events officially has an office space. That's wonderful, I exclaimed. The one in the South End you were considering? She nodded excitedly. It's perfect, central location, lots of natural light, and the building has a conference room I can use for client meetings. I'm so proud of you, Ollie. You've built something truly your own. I couldn't have done it without you, she replied. Your business advice, the startup loan, the client referrals. The business advice was free, the loan will be repaid with interest, and the clients contacted you because you're excellent at what you do, I countered. This success is yours. She smiled, acknowledging the truth in my words. Did I tell you Bradley called again last week? Thompson Financial is using a new event planner for their holiday party, and apparently, it's been a disaster. He wanted to know if I'd consider taking over. What did you say? I told him my company doesn't accept clients who refer to my sister as the help. She grinned mischievously. Then I recommended my biggest competitor, who charges twice my rates and is known for last-minute cancellations. I laughed. Remind me never to get on your bad side. As our dinner continued, we discussed plans for the upcoming holidays, our first since the dramatic changes in both our lives. We decided to buck family tradition and take a sisters-only vacation to a small beach town in Florida, away from Boston's winter and the memories of last year's engagement party. No business talk allowed, Allison insisted. Just sun, sand, and sisterly bonding. Deal, I agreed, already looking forward to the break. Leading Meridian was rewarding but exhausting, and I knew Allison was pouring similar energy into her fledgling company. As we walked out of the restaurant into the gently falling snow, Allison linked her arm through mine. You know what I realized recently? Bradley did us both a favor that night. How do you figure? He showed me who he really was before I made the biggest mistake of my life. And he helped us find our way back to being not just sisters, but friends. She squeezed my arm affectionately. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. looking at my sister. Confident, independent, and genuinely happy, I couldn't help but agree. We had both found our paths, different but equally valid, and rediscovered each other in the process. To the Mitchell sisters, I said, catching a snowflake in my free hand. May we always recognize our own worth and each other's. And may we never settle for being just the help in our own stories, Allison added with a smile that held no trace of bitterness, only hard-won wisdom and peace. 6 months later, spring had returned to Boston, bringing with it the fresh energy of new beginnings. Meridian Enterprises had just completed its most successful quarter in company history under my leadership, exceeding projected earnings by 22%. The initial skepticism some board members had expressed about appointing a relatively young female CEO had been silenced by results they couldn't argue with. On this particular morning, I stood before a group of 30 young women in Meridian's main conference room. They were participants in our newly established mentorship program, college students, and recent graduates interested in financial services careers. Looking at their eager faces, I saw reflections of my younger self, determined, hopeful, and perhaps a little intimidated by the path ahead. The most important lesson I can share with you today, I told them, isn't about financial models or investment strategies. It's about recognizing your own value and refusing to let others define your worth. In this industry, you'll encounter people who will try to diminish you based on your gender, your background, or simply because your success threatens them. When that happens, and it will, remember that their limitations are not yours. One young woman raised her hand. MS. Mitchell, did you ever doubt yourself? Even now as CEO, do you still face people who underestimate you? I smiled, thinking of a board meeting just last week where a senior member had expressed surprise at my detailed understanding of blockchain technology, as if my gender somehow made technical knowledge unexpected. Every day, I admitted, self-doubt is part of the human experience, especially when you're charting unfamiliar territory. The key isn't eliminating doubt but preventing it from stopping you. As for being underestimated, I've learned to see that as an advantage. People who underestimate you rarely see you coming until you've already succeeded. After the session, as the participants networked with Meridian executives I'd invited to meet them, my assistant approached with a message. Your sister called. She asked if you're still available for lunch and said to tell you she has news. I checked my watch. Tell her I'll meet her as planned. And Rachel? Block off my calendar for Friday afternoon. I want to finish reviewing those mentorship applications myself. 30 minutes later, I was seated across from Allison at our favorite lunch spot, a small cafe midway between Meridian's headquarters and her new office space. In the months since launching Mitchell Events, Allison had blossomed. The nervous uncertainty that had characterized her post-Bradley period had been replaced by a quiet confidence that reminded me, somewhat surprisingly, of our mother. Sorry I'm late, I said, settling into my chair. The mentorship session ran long. No problem, Allison replied, pushing a menu toward me. How did it go? Wonderfully. These young women are so bright and motivated. Several of them have already asked about internship opportunities. Look at you, creating the female financial empire of the future, she teased. Speaking of empires, your assistant mentioned you have news? Allison's face lit up. Mitchell Events just landed the Children's Hospital annual benefit. It's their centerpiece fundraiser of the year, typically raises over $2 million. And guess who they fired to hire us? Not Bradley's firm. The very same event planning company Thompson Financial recommended after I turned them down. She couldn't contain her satisfied grin. Apparently, they charged a fortune and delivered mediocrity. The hospital board member who contacted me specifically mentioned hearing good things about our ethical business practices and client-centered approach. I raised my water glass in a toast. To karma and quality service. I'll drink to that, she laughed, clinking her glass against mine. But that's not actually my biggest news. There's more? Allison nodded, suddenly looking slightly nervous. I've been seeing someone. For about 2 months now. This was indeed news. Since ending her engagement, Allison had shown zero interest in dating, focusing entirely on building her business. Anyone I know? I asked carefully. Actually, yes. Mark Sullivan. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. Our cousin Mark's business partner? The marketing genius? She nodded. We met when I was consulting with Mark about my company branding. It started as professional conversations over coffee, then gradually became more. He's different, Steph. Thoughtful, genuinely interested in my opinions, and completely supportive of my business. He'd better be, or he'll have me to deal with, I said, only half joking. I haven't told Mom and Dad yet, she admitted. After the whole Bradley disaster, I'm being much more cautious about introducing someone to the family. Wise decision, I agreed. Though I have a feeling Mark will be a significant upgrade. Anyone who's built a business from scratch like he is understands the value of hard work, something Bradley never grasped with his family connections and inherited privilege. Our conversation shifted to plans for our parents' upcoming 40th wedding anniversary. We decided to jointly host a celebration at my waterfront condo, combining Allison's event planning expertise with my spacious home. Mom's been dropping hints about grandchildren again, Allison mentioned as our food arrived. I think she's finally accepted neither of us is in a rush to the altar. Progress, I noted dryly. Though I suspect she'll transfer those expectations to you and Mark if things get serious. One step at a time, Allison replied. After Bradley, I'm in no hurry. The mention of Bradley prompted me to share some industry gossip I'd heard that morning. Apparently, Thompson Financial is struggling. They've lost several major clients in the past quarter, and there are rumors of internal discord. Jonathan mentioned that Bradley's position might be in jeopardy. Can't say I'm sorry to hear it, Allison admitted. Though I don't wish him personal hardship. Just appropriate consequences for his actions. That's more generous than he deserves, I said. But it speaks to your character. As our lunch continued, I marveled at how far we'd both come. The previous year's painful experiences had forged a deeper understanding between us, transforming our relationship from simply being sisters to becoming genuine friends and allies. Later that week, I invited my leadership team to my office for an important announcement. Jonathan Reynolds, still serving as chairman of the board, stood beside me as I addressed the group. As you know, Meridian has traditionally focused on domestic markets, I began. Today, I'm announcing our expansion into European financial services, beginning with the acquisition of Harrington and Associates in London. This strategic move positions us to better serve our multinational clients and access new growth opportunities. After outlining the specifics of the acquisition and answering questions, I noticed Jonathan watching me with unmistakable pride. You've exceeded even my high expectations, Stephanie, he said as the team filed out. The board couldn't be more pleased with Meridian's direction under your leadership. Thank you, Jonathan. That means a great deal coming from you. He paused, then added, I ran into Bradley Thompson at the Economic Club dinner last night. He asked about you. Did he? I kept my tone neutral, though I was curious. Yes. He's been demoted, you know. Back to senior account manager after losing the Henderson account. He seemed humbled. I considered this information. People rarely change fundamentally, Jonathan. They just adapt their strategies when the old ones stop working. He nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps. Though failure can be a powerful teacher for those willing to learn from it. He gathered his papers, preparing to leave. By the way, I've recommended you for the Financial Leadership Award. The ceremony is next month. That's unexpected, I said, genuinely surprised. The award was one of the most prestigious recognitions in our industry. Well-deserved, he corrected. And long overdue for a woman in this field. That evening, I arrived home to find a package outside my door, a beautifully wrapped gift with a card from Allison. Inside was a framed photograph of us as children, arms around each other on the beach, gap-toothed smiles beaming at the camera. The card read, to remind you where we started and how far we've come. Love always, Ollie. The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. For all my professional accomplishments, this renewed connection with my sister felt like the most significant achievement of the past year. The following Sunday, our family gathered at our parents' home for our traditional monthly dinner. As Allison had predicted, Our mother was predictably charmed by Mark, who had accompanied her for the first time. Dad grilled him about his business model, while Mom plied him with second helpings of her famous pot roast. Both signs of parental approval in the Mitchell household. During a quiet moment on the porch swing after dinner, my mother joined me with 2 cups of coffee. "I'm proud of you, Stephanie," she said simply. "Not just for your career success, but for how you supported your sister through everything with Bradley. That's what family is about." I've learned a lot this year, I admit it. About success, about relationships, about what really matters. She nodded, sipping her coffee. The most important lesson in life is learning to recognize your own worth and to surround yourself with people who recognize it too. Sounds like something I said to my mentorship group the other day. I smiled. "Where do you think you got your wisdom?" She winked. "Certainly not from your father's side of the family." We laughed together, and in that moment, I felt a circle completing. The wisdom of mothers passing to daughters, sisters supporting sisters, women recognizing their own strength and value in a world that often tried to diminish it. Later, as Allison and I helped with dishes, some family traditions never changed. She nudged me playfully. "So, CEO Mitchell, what's next on your conquest list? Global financial domination? Running for Senate? NASA's first banker on Mars?" I laughed. "Right now, I'm focusing on being present for what I have, not just planning for what's next." "That's something I've learned from you, actually." She looked surprised. "From me?" "Your ability to connect with people, to be fully present in relationships. That's a gift, Ollie. One I'm still learning to develop." She smiled, clearly touched. "Well, if we're exchanging compliments, I've learned persistence from you. The determination to keep going even when things get tough." "The Mitchell sisters' superpowers," I said. "Presence and persistence. Unstoppable combination," she agreed. As spring turned to summer, both our professional and personal lives continued to flourish. Meridian's European expansion proceeded smoothly, while Mitchell Events hired 2 more staff members to handle increasing demand. Allison's relationship with Mark deepened, though they were taking things slowly, a pace that suited them both after her experience with Bradley. I channeled more of my energy into the mentorship program, working directly with several promising young women. Teaching them to navigate the often challenging landscape of financial services helped me appreciate how far I'd come and recognize the responsibility I now had to create change from within. In July, Allison and I finally took that sisters-only vacation we'd promised ourselves, spending a week at a quiet beach house in Florida. Away from Boston's financial district and event planning circuit, we reconnected as simply Stephanie and Allison, not CEO and entrepreneur, not the brainy sister and the social sister, just 2 women who shared history, blood, and a deeper understanding of each other than anyone else could claim. On our last evening, sitting on the beach watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Allison asked a question that caught me off guard. "Are you happy, Steph? Truly happy?" I considered the question carefully. "Yes," I answered finally. Not in the simplistic way I might have defined happiness before. It's more complex now: satisfaction in my work, meaningful connections with people I care about, the knowledge that I'm making a difference. It's not perfect, but it's authentic. "That's what I thought," she nodded, looking satisfied. "You seem more yourself now. Less guarded." "And you?" I asked. "Are you happy?" "I am," she said with quiet certainty. "I'm building something that matters to me on my terms. And I've stopped trying to be what others expect. That's freedom." We sat in comfortable silence as the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the message across the sky that some endings make way for even more beautiful beginnings. 6 months after Bradley had dismissively called me just the help, both Mitchell sisters had discovered something profound. When you refuse to let others define your worth, you free yourself to create a life that truly reflects your values and honors your unique strengths. The journey hadn't been easy, but the destination, this moment of authentic peace and purpose, was worth every difficult step along the way. Have you ever been underestimated only to prove someone wrong? Or perhaps you've had a relationship that seemed perfect until you saw someone's true colors. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life experiences, and share with someone who might need to be reminded of their worth today. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, those who underestimate you don't determine your value, you do.